The Hargroves and the Velasquez families, to all outward appearances, were living the American dream. Their manicured lawns and hybrid cars in the driveways gave no hint of the tempest brewing behind closed doors. Liam and Rachel Hargrove had been college sweethearts, married for 15 years. Liam, a software engineer for a local tech startup, was known for his dry wit and passion for homebrewing. Rachel, a pediatric nurse, volunteered at the neighborhood watch and was always ready with a plate of her famous lavender shortbread for new neighbors. They were the couple others looked to as a model of stability and success. Just 2 doors down lived Raphael and Marisol Velasquez. Raphael, a charismatic restaurateur, had moved from Mexico City a decade ago to open what would become the hottest fusion taqueria. His wife Marisol, a yoga instructor and part-time translator, was beloved for her vibrant energy and warm hugs. Their whirlwind romance had culminated in a beachside wedding in Tulum just 5 years prior. The two couples had become fast friends shortly after the Velasquez moved in, bonding over weekend barbecues and a shared love for wineries. They vacationed together and celebrated holidays as a unit. To their friends and neighbors, they were the picture of modern multicultural friendship. But beneath the surface of potlucks and game nights, a current of restlessness was growing, a longing for excitement, for newness, for the spark that had faded in the routines of married life. It was this unspoken desire that would lead them down a path from which there was no return. The idea first surfaced on a crisp autumn evening, as the 4 friends lounged in the Hargroves' hot tub, steam rising into the star-studded sky. The wine had been flowing freely, loosening tongues and lowering inhibitions. Raphael, always the jokester, had made a quip about wife-swapping that hung in the air a beat too long before nervous laughter dispersed it. But the seed had been planted. Over the next few weeks, the joke resurfaced, each time met with less laughter and more contemplative silence. It was Rachel who finally broached the subject seriously, during one of the couple's regular dinner dates. "We're all adults here," she began, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands beneath the table. "Maybe there's something to this idea, a way to spice things up." The silence that followed was deafening. Marisol's eyes widened, darting between her husband and friends. Liam stared intently at his plate. It was Raphael who broke the tension, his usual grin replaced by a look of thoughtful consideration. The conversation that followed lasted deep into the night. Boundaries were discussed, scenarios explored, concerns voiced. Liam, initially the most hesitant, found himself warming to the idea as the others talked through the logistics. Marisol, surprisingly, was the most enthusiastic once the initial shock wore off. "It's just physical, right?" she said, her dark eyes sparkling with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "No feelings involved, a temporary arrangement to explore and then return to our partners." They agreed to think it over individually, and as couples before making any decisions. The next week was filled with hushed conversations behind closed doors, furtive glances across the street, and more than one sleepless night spent staring at the ceiling, imagining possibilities. When they reconvened, the decision was unanimous if tentative. They would try it, just once to see how it felt. Rules were established. A 1-month time frame, complete honesty with their original partners, and the freedom to call it off at any time if anyone felt uncomfortable. As they raised their glasses to seal the agreement, none of them could have foreseen the tragedy that would unfold from this moment of adventurous curiosity. The die was cast, and the wheel of fate had begun to turn. The agreed-upon evening arrived with a palpable tension in the air. The Hargroves' home, usually a warm and inviting space, felt charged with an electric anticipation. Liam had spent the afternoon obsessively cleaning, a nervous habit that manifested whenever he felt out of his depth. Rachel, meanwhile, had changed outfits no less than 5 times before settling on a simple black dress that hugged her curves. Across the street, Raphael and Marisol prepared with a mix of excitement and trepidation. Raphael, ever the showman, had set out candles and opened a bottle of expensive tequila he'd been saving for a special occasion. Marisol moved through her son's salutations, trying to center herself and calm the butterflies in her stomach. At precisely 8 p.m., as agreed, Rachel made the short walk to the Velasquez home. Her heart pounded with each step, a mixture of guilt and exhilaration coursing through her veins. Raphael greeted her at the door with a warm smile and a glass of tequila, which she accepted gratefully. Meanwhile, Marisol arrived at the Hargroves, a vision in a flowing red dress that seemed to accentuate her every movement. Liam, usually so composed, found himself fumbling with the wine opener, suddenly acutely aware of Marisol's presence in a way he'd never been before. The initial moments were awkward, filled with stilted small talk and nervous laughter. But as the alcohol flowed and the reality of their situation set in, the atmosphere began to shift. Raphael, ever the charmer, regaled Rachel with stories of his childhood, each tale bringing him physically closer to her on the couch. Rachel found herself captivated, not just by the stories, but by the passion with which he told them, so different from Liam's reserved nature. Across the street, Liam and Marisol had moved from the living room to the kitchen, where Marisol insisted on teaching Liam how to properly make guacamole. The simple act of chopping avocados became an intimate dance, their hands brushing against each other. As the night progressed, inhibitions lowered and desires rose to the surface. Raphael's hand found its way to Rachel's thigh, and she surprised herself by not pulling away. In the Hargrove kitchen, Liam found himself mesmerized by the graceful curves of Marisol. The transition from social interaction to physical intimacy was both abrupt and natural. A lingering look, a tentative touch, and suddenly they were crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. Clothes were shed, breaths quickened, and in the dim light of bedrooms usually shared with other partners, new connections were forged. In the aftermath, as they lay in unfamiliar beds beside familiar friends, each participant grappled with a complex mix of emotions. Guilt, excitement, confusion, and a strange sense of loss all mingled together. As they drifted off to sleep, none of them realized that this night had set in motion a chain of events that would end in tragedy. For in the dim light of the Hargrove bedroom, Liam had looked into Marisol's eyes and felt something stir within him that went far beyond the physical boundaries they had agreed upon. In the days following the swap, life in the Laurelhurst neighborhood seemed to return to its usual rhythm. Liam went back to his coding, Rachel to her patients, Raphael to his restaurant, and Marisol to her yoga studio. But beneath the veneer of normalcy, a subtle shift had occurred, particularly within Liam Hargrove. At first, the changes were almost imperceptible. Liam found himself lingering a little longer at the window, his gaze drifting towards the Velasquez home. He began taking more frequent walks, timing them to coincide with Marisol's return from her yoga classes. His usual playlist of tech podcasts was replaced by the Latin music Raphael had introduced him to, the rhythms reminding him of Marisol. As weeks passed, these small changes became more pronounced. Liam's colleagues at the startup noticed his distraction, his usual laser focus on code, replaced by long periods of staring blankly at his screen. He began learning Spanish using a language app, telling Rachel it was for an upcoming project at work. Late at night, when sleep eluded him, he found himself scrolling through old photos on his phone, lingering on group pictures where Marisol's smile seemed to outshine everything else. Liam tried to rationalize these feelings, to suppress the growing emotional attachment he felt towards Marisol. He reminded himself of the agreement, of the boundaries they had set. This was supposed to be a one-time thing, a purely physical exploration. But in quiet moments, he couldn't deny the warmth that spread through his chest when he thought of her laugh, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. The internal struggle began to manifest externally. Liam became irritable, snapping at Rachel over small issues. He threw himself into work, staying late at the office to avoid the temptation of seeking out Marisol's company. When the two couples did get together, Liam's behavior oscillated between overly attentive to Marisol and completely avoiding her, drawing curious glances from both Rachel and Raphael. One evening, as Liam lay awake beside a sleeping Rachel, the full weight of his emotions crashed over him. He realized, with a mix of exhilaration and horror, that he was falling in love with Marisol. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. He knew he should end it, should confess to Rachel and distance himself from Marisol, but the mere idea of never being close to her again felt like a physical pain in his chest. As dawn broke, Liam made a decision. He would try harder to suppress these feelings, to be the husband Rachel deserved. But even as he resolved this, a small part of him whispered that it was already too late. The seed of desire had been planted, and it was growing into something that couldn't be easily uprooted. As autumn gave way to winter, the once warm and easy friendship between the two couples began to cool. The change was subtle at first, manifesting in canceled plans and shorter, less frequent interactions. But as weeks passed, the tension became palpable,
a silent presence at every gathering. Rachel was the first to notice the shift in her husband's behavior. Liam, once an open book to her, had become distant and guarded. She caught him checking his phone more frequently, his face lighting up at certain notifications before quickly schooling his features back to neutrality. When she asked about his day, his answers became vague and evasive. During one of their now rare dinners with the Velasquez, Rachel couldn't help but notice the way Liam's eyes followed Marisol's every movement. Raphael, usually jovial and laid back, began to exhibit signs of stress. His legendary patience in the kitchen shortened, and staff at his restaurant whispered about his uncharacteristic outbursts. At home, he became possessive of Marisol in a way he'd never been before, questioning her about her daily activities and suggesting they spend less time with the Hargroves. Marisol, caught in the middle, found herself torn between her growing affection for Liam and her commitment to Raphael. She tried to maintain normalcy, suggesting double dates and neighborhood gatherings like before, but each interaction was fraught with unspoken tensions and loaded glances. The breaking point came at a neighborhood block party in early December. As holiday lights twinkled on every house, the four found themselves together for the first time in weeks. The conversation was stilted, punctuated by long silences and forced laughter. When Marisol excused herself to get a drink, Liam immediately offered to help, leaving Rachel and Raphael alone. Rachel, her suspicions finally boiling over, confronted Raphael. "Is there something going on between them?" she demanded, her voice low but intense. Raphael, his own jealousy and fears rising to the surface, lashed out defensively. "Maybe you should ask your husband that," he snapped back. Their heated exchange drew the attention of other partygoers, and by the time Liam and Marisol returned, they found their spouses in a tense standoff. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of awkward apologies and hasty goodbyes. That night in both households, long-avoided conversations finally took place. Accusations were made, denials issued, and tears shed. Rachel demanded answers from Liam, her voice cracking as she asked if he was in love with Marisol. Liam's hesitation before his denial was all the confirmation she needed. Across the street, Raphael's jealousy exploded into a rage that left Marisol shaken. His accusations of betrayal and demands for the truth echoed through their home, a jarring contrast to the peaceful life they'd built. As the night wore on, all four individuals grappled with the realization that their simple agreement had spiraled into something far more complicated and potentially destructive. The foundation of trust that had supported their friendships and marriages was crumbling, and in its place, a volatile mix of love, jealousy, and resentment was taking root. January 15th dawned cold and gray, a thick fog hanging over the town like a portent of the tragedy to come. The weeks following the block party confrontation had been tense, with both couples retreating into themselves, communication reduced to terse texts and avoided glances across the street. That evening, Liam sat in his home office, ostensibly working late but in reality lost in thoughts of Marisol. The sound of the front door opening and closing jolted him from his reverie. Rachel's voice, tight with barely controlled emotion, called out his name. In the living room, Liam found not just Rachel but Raphael and Marisol as well. The atmosphere was charged, Raphael's face a mask of barely contained fury, Marisol's eyes red-rimmed and pleading. Rachel stood apart, her posture rigid, arms crossed defensively across her chest. "We need to talk," Rachel began, her voice trembling slightly. "All of us. This has gone on long enough." What followed was a maelstrom of emotions, years of friendship, and months of hidden feelings exploding into the open. Raphael accused Liam of pursuing Marisol, of trying to steal her away. Rachel, tears streaming down her face, demanded to know how long the affair had been going on. Marisol, caught between her growing feelings for Liam and her loyalty to Raphael, tried desperately to calm the situation. Liam, overwhelmed by the onslaught, initially retreated into denial. But as the accusations flew and emotions heightened, something inside him snapped. In a moment of reckless honesty, he confessed his feelings for Marisol, his words cutting through the chaos like a knife. Raphael, his face contorting with rage, lunged at Liam. The two men grappled, years of friendship evaporating in an instant as fists flew and furniture toppled. Rachel screamed for them to stop, her pleas drowned out by the sounds of the struggle. Marisol tried to intervene, attempting to pull Raphael away, but was shoved aside in the chaos. In the frenzy, no one noticed Raphael's hand closing around a heavy crystal vase. It wasn't until the sickening thud of crystal meeting flesh and bone echoed through the room
that everything froze. Liam crumpled to the ground, blood pooling rapidly around his head. The vase slipped from Raphael's hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. For a moment, no one moved, the scene before them too horrific to comprehend. It was Rachel who broke the paralysis, her nurse's training kicking in as she rushed to Liam's side. Her fingers frantically sought a pulse as she barked orders at the others to call 911. Marisol, shaking uncontrollably, fumbled with her phone, her tear-blurred vision making it hard to dial. Raphael stood motionless, his face a mask of shock and disbelief at what he had done. The sound of sirens in the distance broke through the haze, snapping him back to the horrifying reality of the situation. Paramedics arrived minutes later, but their efforts were in vain. Liam Hargrove was pronounced dead at the scene, his life extinguished in a moment of uncontrolled passion. As police cars pulled up, their flashing lights illuminating the quiet street, neighbors emerged from their homes drawn by the commotion. In the chaos that followed, statements were taken, evidence collected. Raphael, still in a state of shock, offered no resistance as he was handcuffed and led to a waiting police car. As dawn broke, the idyllic facade of Laurelhurst had been shattered. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the morning breeze, a stark contrast to the well-manicured lawns and cheerful holiday decorations that still adorned some homes. The investigation into Liam Hargrove's death began in earnest the following morning. Detective Amelia Schaefer, a veteran of Homicide Division, took charge of the case, unaware of the shocking plot twist that was about to be revealed. Her first step was to separate the three survivors, each sequestered in a different interview room at the precinct. Rachel Hargrove, still in shock, provided a disjointed account of the evening's events. She spoke of the growing tension between the couples, the suspicions that had eaten away at her for weeks. Her description of the fatal confrontation was punctuated by bouts of sobbing and long haunted silences. Marisol Velasquez, visibly distraught, initially refused to speak without a lawyer present. When one arrived, she gave a tearful confession about the affair with Liam, insisting that it had been emotional rather than physical since the initial swap. She described Raphael's increasing jealousy and controlling behavior in the weeks leading up to the tragedy. Raphael Velasquez, advised by his lawyer to remain silent, sat stoically through initial questioning. However, as the hours wore on and the gravity of his situation became clear, he broke down. In a moment of raw honesty, he admitted to striking Liam but insisted he never meant to kill him. It was an accident, he repeated over and over, his voice hoarse with emotion. As statements were taken, forensic teams combed through both the Hargrove and Velasquez residences. They uncovered a series of text messages between Liam and Marisol, revealing the depth of their emotional entanglement. Emails drafts found on Liam's computer showed he had been contemplating leaving Rachel, adding another layer to the tragedy. The murder weapon, the crystal vase, was sent to the lab for analysis. Fingerprints matched Raphael's, and traces of Liam's blood and hair were found embedded in the shattered pieces. The force required to cause such catastrophic injury was consistent with Raphael's build and the rage described by witnesses. Neighbors were interviewed, painting a picture of two couples who had once been the cornerstone of the community. Many expressed shock, unable to reconcile the violent act with the friendly, successful people they thought they knew. As the investigation progressed, Detective Schaefer began to piece together a timeline of events. The initial wife swap, intended as a one-time exploration, had sparked an emotional affair between Liam and Marisol. This, in turn, had led to mounting tensions and suspicions, culminating in the fatal confrontation. The case, initially seeming straightforward, grew more complex as layers of motivation and circumstance were revealed. As the first week of the investigation drew to a close, Detective Schaefer stood before a board covered in photos, timelines, and connecting threads. The facts were clear, but the full truth of what had transpired in the Hargrove living room that fateful night remained elusive. The case was far from closed, and the ripples of this tragedy would continue to spread through the lives of all involved. As the investigation deepened, Detective Schaefer and her team began to uncover layers of complexity that went beyond the surface narrative. Delving into the backgrounds of all four individuals involved revealed hidden motivations and long-buried secrets that cast the events in a new light. Liam Hargrove, it emerged, had a history of depression that he had carefully hidden from all but Rachel. Interviews with his colleagues revealed a man who had been struggling with his work in recent months, his usual passion for coding replaced by a listlessness that many had attributed to simple burnout. A deeper dive into his medical records showed a recent change in antidepressant medication, one that came with warnings about increased impulsivity and mood swings. Rachel's perfected image of the devoted wife and nurse also began to crack under scrutiny. Former co-workers spoke of her intense ambition, of opportunities for advancement she had passed up to support Liam's career. Some hinted at resentment that had been building for years, carefully hidden behind a facade of contentment. Her enthusiastic suggestion of the wife swap began to look less like a spontaneous idea and more like a calculated risk to shake up her stagnant marriage. Raphael Velasquez's charismatic exterior concealed a man haunted by insecurities. Immigration records revealed a complicated history, with Raphael having overstayed a student visa years ago before marrying Marisol and gaining legal status. This precarious past had left him with a deep-seated fear of losing everything he had built, manifesting in his recent controlling behavior towards Marisol. Perhaps most surprisingly, Marisol's image as the carefree yoga instructor belied a woman with hidden depths. A sealed juvenile record from her teenage years in California hinted at a troubled past she had worked hard to overcome. Friends from before her marriage to Raphael described a passionate, often reckless young woman who had seemingly transformed herself into the picture of stability upon moving to Portland. As these details came to light, the narrative of the case shifted. What had initially seemed a straightforward crime of passion revealed itself to be the culmination of years of unspoken tensions, secret struggles, and unfulfilled desires. The wife swap agreement, far from being the catalyst, now appeared to be merely the spark that had ignited a powder keg of suppressed emotions and hidden resentments. Detective Schaefer found herself grappling with a case that defied easy categorization. The lines between victim and perpetrator blurred, with each person involved bearing some measure of responsibility for the tragedy that had unfolded. The trial of Raphael Velasquez for the murder of Liam Hargrove began on a rainy Monday in late spring, nearly 6 months after the fatal confrontation. Raphael, looking gaunt and somber in a dark suit, was led in by his defense team. Rachel Hargrove, still wearing her grief like a shroud, entered flanked by supportive colleagues. Marisol, who would be testifying for both the prosecution and the defense, slipped in through a side entrance, her once vibrant presence dimmed by months of guilt and public scrutiny. Inside the courtroom, District Attorney laid out the prosecution's case. She painted a picture of Raphael as a man consumed by jealousy, who had lashed out in a premeditated act of violence. The crystal vase, she argued, had been grabbed with intent, the fatal blow delivered with the full force of Raphael's rage. In contrast, Raphael's defense team presented their client as a man pushed to the breaking point. They spoke of the sanctity of marriage, of the betrayal Raphael had suffered, and of the confrontation as a moment of temporary insanity rather than calculated murder. Over the next 3 weeks, a parade of witnesses took the stand. Forensic experts debated the force and angle of the fatal blow. Neighbors recounted the gradual shift in dynamics between the two couples. Colleagues and friends of both Liam and Raphael testified to their states of mind in the weeks leading up to the tragedy. As the trial neared its end, both the prosecution and defense made impassioned final arguments. The judge, taking into account Raphael's unique circumstances of the case, sentenced him to 18 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 12 years. The sentence was met with mixed reactions, some feeling it was too lenient, others believing it appropriately balanced justice with mercy. Randall Mammoth, a successful businessman, his wife Sydney, a dedicated homemaker, and Sydney's daughter from a previous marriage, Celeste, lived in a sprawling house. Their neighbors saw them as the perfect family, affluent, attractive, and seemingly happy. But beneath the polished exterior of manicured lawns and dinner parties, a sinister undercurrent was about to pull the Mammoths into a vortex of forbidden desire, betrayal, and ultimately, violence. What began as a typical case of marital discontent would spiral into a shocking tale of taboo romance between stepfather and stepdaughter, culminating in a confrontation that ended in twisted death and others' lives shattered beyond repair. Randall and Sydney Mammoth's romance began like many others, with a chance encounter at a charity gala in Philadelphia in the spring of 2010. Randall, then 35, was a rising star in the world of finance, known for his sharp mind and charismatic personality. Sydney, 32 at the time, was a divorcee with a young daughter, working as an interior designer for wealthy clients. Their whirlwind courtship captivated their social circle. Randall was smitten by Sydney's elegance and wit, while Sydney saw in Randall the stability and success she craved after her tumultuous first marriage. Within 6 months, Randall had proposed, presenting Sydney with a dazzling diamond ring that became the envy of their friends. The wedding, held at the prestigious Rittenhouse Hotel, was the social event of the season. Sydney's 7-year-old daughter, Celeste, served as the flower girl, her cherubic face beaming as she watched her mother marry the man who would become her stepfather. For the first few years, the Mammoths seemed to thrive. Randall's career continued to soar, and he was soon made partner at his firm. Sydney threw herself into the role of the perfect corporate wife, hosting dinner parties and charity events that cemented their status in elite circles. She doted on Celeste, ensuring the girl wanted for nothing, from the best schools to extravagant vacations. But as the novelty of their new life together wore off, cracks began to appear in the foundation of their marriage. Randall's long hours at the office and frequent business trips left Sydney feeling neglected. She had given up her career to support his, and now found herself increasingly isolated in their large, empty house. Sydney's attempts to rekindle the romance were met with indifference from Randall, who seemed more interested in his spreadsheets than his wife. Their conversations, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, became terse exchanges about household matters and Celeste's school schedule. By the time Celeste entered high school, the Mammoths' marriage existed mostly for show. They slept in separate bedrooms, citing Randall snoring as the reason to curious friends. Their interactions were cordial but cold, like business partners rather than loving spouses. Sydney threw herself into volunteer work and her role as Celeste's mother, living vicariously through her daughter's achievements and social life. Randall buried himself deeper in his work, taking on more responsibilities at the firm and spending even less time at home. Neither was willing to admit defeat and file for divorce. Their shared fear of scandal, the comfort of their lifestyle, and concern for how it would affect Celeste kept them trapped in their loveless union. Little did they know that their carefully maintained facade was about to crumble in the most unexpected and tragic way. As Celeste blossomed from a precocious child into a striking young woman, the dynamics in the Mammoth household began to shift. Now 18 and preparing for college, Celeste had inherited her mother's grace and her biological father's vivacious spirit. Celeste's relationship with her mother had always been close, if sometimes strained by Sydney's tendency to overprotect and live through her daughter's experiences. With Randall, however, things had been more complicated. In the early years of the marriage, he had been a doting stepfather, attending her recitals and helping with homework. But as his marriage to Sydney cooled, so did his interactions with Celeste. That changed during Celeste's senior year of high school. Randall, perhaps feeling the weight of his own mortality as he approached 50, began to take a renewed interest in his stepdaughter's life. He attended her dance performances, beaming with pride from the audience. He engaged her in conversations about her college plans, offering advice on majors and career paths. Sydney, at first, was pleased to see Randall finally acting like part of the family again. She encouraged the father-daughter bonding, hoping it might somehow bridge the gulf in their marriage. But as the months wore on, she began to sense something unsettling in the way Randall looked at Celeste, in the way their conversations would stop abruptly when she entered a room. Celeste, for her part, found herself drawn to Randall in a way that both excited and confused her. His attention made her feel seen in a way she hadn't before. She began to dress more carefully when she knew he'd be home, to seek out his company under the guise of needing help with college applications or financial advice. The tension in the house grew palpable. Family dinners became a minefield of loaded glances and double entendres. Sydney watched with growing unease as her daughter and husband orbited each other, their gravitational pull seeming to exclude her entirely. As Celeste's high school graduation approached, the Mammoth house was a powder keg of unspoken desires and simmering resentments. None of them could have predicted the explosion that was to come, or the devastating aftermath that would follow. The line between appropriate stepfather-stepdaughter affection and something more sinister was crossed on a rainy night in April, just weeks before Celeste's graduation. Sydney was out of town for a charity event, leaving Randall and Celeste alone in the house. They had settled in to watch a movie, a bottle of wine between them. Randall reasoning that at 18 Celeste was old enough for a glass or two under parental supervision. As the wine flowed and the storm raged outside, their inhibitions lowered. Celeste, emboldened by alcohol and the charged atmosphere, confessed to Randall that she had always found him attractive. Randall, his judgment clouded and his loneliness overwhelming, responded not with the fatherly dismissal he should have, but with a confession of his own growing feelings. One touch led to another, and soon they found themselves entangled on the couch, years of suppressed attraction exploding into a passionate encounter. The next morning brought with it shame, confusion, and the thrill of forbidden fruit tasted. Both Randall and Celeste swore it would never happen again, that it was a mistake born of loneliness and wine. But the dam had broken, and the flood of desire was not so easily contained. Stolen glances became stolen kisses, furtive touches beneath the dinner table, coded text messages arranging clandestine meetings. They justified their actions to themselves and each other. Randall wasn't Celeste's real father, they reasoned. Sydney had been cold and distant for years. They were both consenting adults. Love, they told each other, couldn't be wrong. But the guilt gnawed at them, particularly Celeste. She saw the pain in her mother's eyes, the growing suspicion. She knew the devastating impact this would have if discovered, yet she couldn't bring herself to end it, addicted to the rush of their forbidden romance. Randall compartmentalized, as he did with all aspects of his life. When with Sydney, he played the role of distant but dutiful husband. With his colleagues, he was the consummate professional. But in those secret moments with Celeste, he allowed himself to feel a passion he thought he had lost forever. Their trysts became more frequent and daring as the weeks passed. A rendezvous at a motel on the outskirts of town, under the guise of college tours. Heated encounters in Randall's car, parked in secluded spots. Each time they swore it would be the last. Each time they found themselves drawn back together, powerless against the pull of their illicit desire. But as spring turned to summer, the web of lies they had woven began to tangle, threatening to ensnare them all. As Celeste's freshman year of college approached, the affair between her and Randall intensified. The impending separation seemed to fuel their passion, each encounter tinged with a desperate urgency. They began taking greater risks, their need for each other overriding their caution. Randall started finding excuses to visit Celeste at her college campus, a mere 2-hour drive away. He would claim business meetings in the area, when in reality he was spending long, luxurious afternoons tangled in the sheets of Celeste's dorm room. Celeste, for her part, would invent study groups and extracurricular activities to explain her frequent trips home on weekends. Their behavior began to impact their relationships with others. Randall grew even more distant from Sydney, barely able to look at her without feeling a stab of guilt. He threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, using it as both an escape and an excuse for his absences. Celeste struggled to connect with her college peers, always holding back, always guarding her explosive secret. The affair also began to change them as individuals. Randall, reinvigorated by his relationship with Celeste, started paying more attention to his appearance. He joined a gym, updated his wardrobe, even contemplated hair restoration treatments. His colleagues remarked on his newfound energy, assuming he had finally found work-life balance. Celeste, meanwhile, found herself torn between exhilaration and shame. She excelled in her studies, channeling her turbulent emotions into her coursework, but her social life suffered. She rebuffed advances from classmates, unable to contemplate a normal relationship while entangled with her stepfather. There were close calls that should have served as wake-up calls. Once, Sydney nearly walked in on them in a compromising position in the pool house, saved only by a well-timed phone call that delayed her arrival home. Another time, one of Celeste's dormmates spotted Randall leaving her room early in the morning, leading to awkward questions that Celeste clumsily deflected. Despite these near misses, Randall and Celeste convinced themselves they could maintain their secret indefinitely. They began making tentative plans for a future together, whispering about the day when they could finally be open about their love. Randall spoke of divorcing Sydney, of starting a new life with Celeste once she finished college. Celeste daydreamed about a fairy tale wedding, conveniently ignoring the devastation it would wreak on her mother. But as their fantasy future grew more elaborate, so did the tangled web of lies required to sustain their present. Randall's finances came under scrutiny at home as Sydney questioned the increased business expenses and mysterious cash withdrawals. Celeste's academic performance, while still strong, began to slip as the stress of her double life took its toll.
The pressure began to mount, the cracks in their carefully constructed facade widening day by day. Still they persisted, each stolen moment together reinforcing their belief that their love was worth any cost. They failed to see that the price would be far higher than either of them could have imagined, and that the bill was coming due far sooner than they knew. It was during a lunch with her friend Beatrice that the first inkling of the terrible truth began to form in Sydney's mind. Beatrice, ever the gossip, mentioned offhandedly that she'd seen Randall and Celeste having an intense conversation at a cafe in town, at a time when Celeste was supposed to be at college and Randall at work. The way Beatrice described their body language, leaning in close, hands touching on the table, sent a chill down Sydney's spine. She brushed it off, laughing too loudly and changing the subject, but the seed of suspicion had been planted. From that moment on, Sydney began to pay closer attention to the interactions between her husband and daughter. She noticed the lingering glances, the inside jokes she wasn't privy to, the way they always seemed to find reasons to be alone together. As the evidence mounted, Sydney found herself trapped in a state of denial. The alternative was too horrible to contemplate, but with each passing day, the truth she didn't want to face inched closer to the surface, threatening to explode into the open and shatter their lives forever. The day Sydney's world imploded started like any other. It was a warm June morning, the air heavy with the promise of summer storms. Sydney had plans to meet friends for lunch, but a last-minute cancellation left her with an unexpected free afternoon. On a whim, she decided to surprise Randall at his office, perhaps suggest an impromptu date night to rekindle their faltering connection. But Randall wasn't in his office. His assistant, flustered by Sydney's unexpected appearance, let slip that Mr. Mammoth had left early, mentioning something about a family emergency. Sydney felt her blood run cold. There was no family emergency she knew of. With trembling hands, she took out her phone and opened the tracking app she'd installed weeks ago in a moment of paranoid weakness. The pulsing dot of Randall's location appeared not at home, not at any hospital, but at a nondescript address on the outskirts of town. The drive to that address was a blur. Sydney moved on autopilot, her mind racing through possibilities, each more devastating than the last. She pulled up to a small motel, the kind that rented rooms by the hour, and there in the parking lot was Randall's car. Sydney sat in her vehicle, paralyzed with indecision. Did she really want to know? Couldn't she just drive away, pretend she'd never seen this? But then another car pulled into the lot, Celeste's beat-up college Honda. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Sydney watched her daughter hurry across the parking lot and knock on one of the motel room doors. It opened, Randall's familiar silhouette visible for a moment before Celeste slipped inside. Sydney sat in stunned silence, her mind refusing to process what her eyes had just witnessed. Seconds stretched into minutes as she stared at the closed motel room door, willing it to be some sort of mistake, a misunderstanding, anything but the betrayal it so clearly was. Finally, operating on instinct rather than conscious thought, Sydney got out of her car. She raised her hand to knock, then paused, her fist trembling in midair. From inside she could hear muffled laughter, Celeste's musical giggle, Randall's deeper chuckle. The sounds of happiness and intimacy twisted like a knife in her gut. With a deep breath, Sydney steeled herself and rapped sharply on the door. The laughter inside abruptly ceased, replaced by hushed, panicked whispers. She knocked again, louder this time, her calm facade cracking as she called out. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before she heard movement inside. The door opened slowly, revealing Randall, his hair mussed and shirt hastily buttoned. Behind him, Sydney could see Celeste, her face a mask of guilt and fear. In that moment, as Sydney looked from her husband to her daughter, the full weight of their betrayal came crashing down upon her. Her world, already fragile, shattered completely. The tension in the small motel room was suffocating as Sydney stepped inside, her eyes darting between Randall and Celeste. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the hum of the ancient air conditioner and the pounding of Sydney's heart in her ears. Randall was the first to break the silence, his voice strained as he attempted to explain. But Sydney cut him off, her voice eerily calm. Randall stepped forward, attempting to shield Celeste. "Sydney, please. This isn't Celeste's fault." A harsh laugh escaped Sydney's lips. The argument escalated quickly, years of pent-up resentment and betrayal pouring out. Accusations flew back and forth. Sydney accused Randall of grooming Celeste, of taking advantage of her youth and innocence.
Randall defended their relationship, insisting it was real love, that Celeste is an adult now. Celeste, caught between her mother and the man she thought she loved, tried desperately to mediate. She pleaded with Sydney to understand, swore that Randall had never taken advantage of her, that their feelings were mutual, but Sydney was beyond reason. In her eyes, this was the ultimate betrayal, not just of her as a wife, but as a mother. As the shouting reached a fever pitch, Sydney noticed Randall inching towards the bedside table. She saw the glint of metal and realized with a jolt of fear that he was reaching for something. The gun he always kept for protection. Time seemed to slow down. Sydney lunged for Randall, determined to stop him from doing something unthinkable. Celeste, seeing her mother's sudden movement, misinterpreted it as an attack on Randall and tried to intervene. In the ensuing scuffle, the gun went off. The sound of the shot was deafening in the small room. For a moment, everything went still. Then Celeste crumpled to the floor, a red stain blossoming on her shirt. Sydney's scream of anguish shattered the silence. Randall stood frozen, the gun slipping from his nerveless fingers. As Sydney frantically tried to stem the blood flowing from her daughter's wound, the full horror of what had happened began to sink in. Their secret was out, and the consequences were far more devastating than any of them could have imagined. The gunshot at the motel brought a swift response from local law enforcement. Within minutes, the small parking lot was awash in flashing lights as police cars and an ambulance converged on the scene. First responders found a tableau of tragedy in room 114. Celeste lay on the floor, barely clinging to life despite Sydney's desperate attempts to stop the bleeding. Randall Mammoth sat slumped in a corner, his eyes vacant, the gun still on the floor where he had dropped it. Sydney, her hands and clothes covered in her daughter's blood, alternated between frantic pleas to the paramedics and incoherent sobs. Detective Liam Donovan, a veteran of the small police force, took charge of the scene. As Celeste was rushed to the hospital, Donovan began the grim task of piecing together what had happened in that motel room. The physical evidence was clear enough. One shot fired, one victim, the gun registered to Randall Mammoth. But the why of it all was murkier. Initial questioning of Sydney and Randall yielded conflicting stories, both too distraught to provide a coherent account of events. As news of the shooting spread, the quiet community was rocked by shock and disbelief. The Mammoths had always seemed like the perfect family, successful, respected, involved in local charities. The idea that such violence could erupt among them was almost inconceivable to their neighbors and friends. In the days that followed, as Celeste fought for her life in the ICU, Detective Donovan and his team worked tirelessly to unravel the truth. They combed through phone records, interviewed friends and colleagues, and dug into the family's background. Slowly, a picture began to emerge of a family not nearly as perfect as their polished exterior suggested. As Detective Donovan delved deeper into the Mammoth case, the facade of the perfect family crumbled rapidly. Interviews with family friends and colleagues painted a picture of a marriage long devoid of love, held together by appearances and financial convenience. Beatrice Whitaker, Sydney's closest friend, provided crucial information about Sydney's growing suspicions in the months leading up to the shooting. She recounted tearful lunches where Sydney had confided her fears about Randall's possible infidelity, never suspecting the true nature of his betrayal. Randall's co-workers described a man who had seemed rejuvenated in recent months, speaking often of a new love in his life. They had assumed he was having a typical midlife crisis affair, never imagining the object of his affection was his own stepdaughter. But it was Celeste's college roommate who provided the most damning evidence. Once assured of police confidentiality, Zoe shared a trove of text messages Celeste had sent her, detailing the affair with Randall in the sort of giddy, love-struck language typical of a young woman in the throes of what she believed to be true love. The digital trail proved to be a goldmine for investigators. Subpoenaed phone records showed hundreds of calls and messages between Randall and Celeste, often at odd hours. Financial records showed a pattern of expensive gifts from Randall to Celeste, jewelry, designer clothes, even a car, all carefully hidden from Sydney. There were records of hotel stays, weekend getaways disguised as business trips or college visits. As the evidence mounted, the full extent of Randall and Celeste's deception became clear. This was no sudden passion, no momentary lapse in judgment. Their affair had been going on for over a year, meticulously planned and hidden from Sydney and the world. The revelation of the affair shed new light on the events in the motel room. What had first appeared to be a case of accidental discharge during a heated argument now looked more like a potential crime of passion. As Celeste slowly recovered in the hospital, the question on everyone's mind was, who had really pulled the trigger? Was it Randall attempting to silence Celeste to save himself? Sydney in a fit of rage at their betrayal? Or Celeste herself, overcome with guilt and shame when confronted by her mother? The truth, Detective Donovan suspected, might be more complex than any of them had initially thought. District Attorney took personal charge of the case. After reviewing the evidence gathered by Detective Donovan and his team, she made the decision to charge both Randall and Sydney Mammoth with attempted murder. Randall, once the picture of corporate success, appeared haggard and defeated in his orange jumpsuit. His defense team, led by high-powered attorney Xavier Brockton, argued that the shooting had been a tragic accident, the result of a struggle for the gun during a heated family argument. Sydney, by contrast, seemed to have aged years in the weeks since the incident. Her lawyer painted her as a victim, a woman betrayed by her husband and daughter, who had acted in self-defense when she believed Randall was reaching for the gun to silence them both. The question of Celeste's role in the incident loomed large over the proceedings. As the only witness to the shooting besides her parents, her testimony would be crucial. But Celeste, still recovering from her injuries, had so far invoked her Fifth Amendment rights, refusing to testify against either parent. In the end, Randall Mammoth accepted the plea deal. In a hushed courtroom, he pleaded guilty to aggravated assault, receiving a sentence of 10 years in prison. As he was led away in handcuffs, he locked eyes with Sydney one last time, a look that spoke volumes about the pain, betrayal, and regret that had torn their family apart. Sydney, charges against her dropped, left the courthouse a free woman, but one irrevocably changed by the ordeal. Within months, she had sold the family home and moved out of state, seeking a fresh start away from the whispers and sidelong glances. Celeste, once she recovered from her physical wounds, faced the daunting task of healing her emotional and psychological scars. She withdrew from college, entering intensive therapy to deal with the trauma of the shooting and the complicated emotions surrounding her relationship with Randall. Her relationship with Sydney remained strained, the breach of trust between mother and daughter, a chasm not easily bridged. The Mammoth case faded from the national spotlight, but its impact lingered. It served as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the most picture-perfect families can harbor dark secrets. The community, shaken by the violence that had erupted in their midst, began initiatives to address domestic violence and promote healthier family dynamics. At the heart of this tale are three individuals whose paths would become inextricably intertwined. Alton Rhodes, the 19-year-old young man whose charm would prove both irresistible and destructive. Mandy Carell, a neglected wife yearning for passion. And Delilah Frost, a recent divorcee seeking to reclaim her sense of self. Their story would ultimately lead to a shocking act of violence that would forever change the face of the community, leaving its residents to question how well they truly knew their neighbors. At just 19, Alton Rhodes exuded a confidence and maturity that belied his years. Standing at 6 feet tall, he turned heads wherever he went. But it wasn't just his looks that drew people in. Alton possessed a magnetic personality that made everyone feel special in his presence. Raised by a single mother who worked long hours as a nurse, Alton had learned early on to fend for himself. He'd developed a knack for reading people, understanding their needs and desires sometimes before they did themselves. This skill served him well in his part-time job as a barista at the local coffee shop, where he quickly became a favorite among the regulars. Alton had moved to Redwood just a month after graduating high school, eager to strike out on his own. His mother had reconnected with an old friend in the area, who offered Alton the place to stay, while he figured out his next steps. He had vague plans of attending community college, but for now he was content to work and enjoy his newfound freedom. The young man's arrival in the neighborhood didn't go unnoticed. Women of all ages found excuses to visit the coffee shop during his shifts, while men grudgingly admired his easy charm. Alton took it all in stride, flashing his dimpled smile and engaging in friendly banter with everyone who crossed his path. But it was his encounters with his immediate neighbors that would set in motion a chain of events no one could have predicted. On one side of his temporary home lived the Carells,
an outwardly perfect couple whose carefully maintained image hid a crumbling marriage. On the other side resided Delilah Frost, a woman in her early 40s struggling to rebuild her life after a bitter divorce. Alton's first meeting with Mandy Carell occurred on a sunny Saturday morning as he was mowing the lawn. She had come over to welcome him to the neighborhood, bearing a plate of homemade cookies. Their eyes met, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. Little did either of them know that this innocent encounter would be the first step down a dangerous path. Mandy Carell appeared to have it all: a successful husband, a beautiful home, and the envy of her peers. But behind closed doors, her life was far from perfect. Married for 15 years to Gregory, a prominent surgeon, Mandy had slowly watched the passion and intimacy drain from their relationship. Mandy had once been vivacious and ambitious, with dreams of becoming a renowned artist. However, as Gregory's career flourished, she found herself relegated to the role of trophy wife, expected to maintain their home and social status while her own aspirations withered. Her paintings, once filled with vibrant colors and raw emotion, now gathered dust in a forgotten corner of their basement. The first time Mandy laid eyes on Alton, she felt a spark she thought had long since died. His youthful energy and genuine interest in her thoughts and feelings awakened something within her. She found herself making excuses to be outside when he was around, carefully selecting her outfits and rediscovering her makeup collection. Their interaction started innocently enough. Mandy would bring over baked goods or offer gardening advice, lingering longer each time to chat. Alton, in turn, seemed genuinely interested in her life and experiences. He asked about her artwork, and his enthusiasm rekindled her passion for painting. One evening, as Gregory was working late yet again, Mandy invited Alton over to see her old paintings. As they stood in the dim light of the basement, surrounded by canvases that told the story of her faded dreams, something shifted between them. Alton's hand brushed against hers, and Mandy felt a jolt of electricity course through her body. She turned to face him, her heart pounding. Alton's eyes searched hers, asking a silent question. In that moment, all the years of neglect and loneliness culminated in a desperate need for connection. Mandy leaned in, and their lips met in a kiss that would change everything. As she pulled away, breathless and conflicted, Mandy knew she was standing on the precipice of a decision that could unravel her entire life. But the fire that Alton had ignited within her was too strong to ignore. For the first time in years, she felt alive, desired, and seen. At 42 years old, Delilah Frost was starting over. After 20 years of marriage, she had finally found the courage to leave her emotionally abusive husband. The divorce had been finalized just 3 months before Alton moved in next door, leaving Delilah raw and vulnerable. Once a confident and outgoing woman, years of criticism and manipulation had eroded Delilah's self-esteem. She second-guessed every decision, from her choice of clothing to her career moves. The divorce had drained her financially and emotionally, forcing her to downsize from the lavish home she once shared with her ex-husband to the modest house in Redwood. Delilah's first encounter with Alton came on a rainy afternoon when she was struggling to carry groceries from her car. Without hesitation, he rushed over to help, flashing a warm smile that made her feel seen for the first time in years. As they chatted while putting away her groceries, Delilah found herself opening up about her recent divorce and the challenges of rebuilding her life. To her surprise, Alton listened without judgment, offering words of encouragement and support. His youthful optimism was infectious, and Delilah found herself smiling more than she had in months. Before he left, Alton suggested they have coffee sometime, an invitation that both thrilled and terrified her. In the days that followed, Delilah found herself looking forward to their casual encounters. She began taking evening walks, timing them to coincide with Alton's return from work. They would often stop to chat, and Delilah relished the way Alton made her feel, not as a broken middle-aged divorcee but as a woman with value and appeal. Their friendship deepened quickly. Alton showed genuine interest in Delilah's work as a freelance graphic designer, even offering to help her build a website to attract more clients. His belief in her abilities reignited her passion for her career, and she found herself taking on new projects with renewed confidence. One night, as they sat on Delilah's porch sharing a bottle of wine, the air between them charged with unspoken tension. Alton's hand brushed against hers, and Delilah felt a rush of desire she thought she'd never experience again. When he leaned in to kiss her, she didn't hesitate. In that moment, all her doubts and insecurities melted away, replaced by a burning need to feel alive and wanted once more. As summer gave way to fall, Alton found himself entangled in two passionate affairs, each filling a different void in his life. With Mandy, he experienced a depth of emotion and intellectual connection he had never known before. Their clandestine meetings were filled with intense discussions about art, life, and dreams, interspersed with moments of fiery passion. Mandy's neglected talents flourished under Alton's admiration, and she began painting again with renewed vigor. Delilah, on the other hand, offered Alton a sense of nurturing and stability he had always craved. Their time together was marked by comfort and easy laughter, with Delilah's confidence growing stronger with each encounter. Alton found himself playing the role of supportive partner, encouraging her career ambitions and helping her rediscover her self-worth. The young man rationalized his behavior, convincing himself that he was helping both women find happiness and fulfillment. He skillfully juggled his time between them, using his job at the coffee shop and fictitious study groups as covers for his rendezvous. Mandy reveled in the secret thrill of her affair, feeling more alive than she had in years. She threw herself into her art, producing a series of abstract paintings that pulsed with newfound passion and energy. Her renewed zest for life didn't go unnoticed by her husband, Gregory, who attributed the change to a new fitness routine Mandy had ostensibly started. Meanwhile, Delilah blossomed under Alton's attention. Her wardrobe underwent a transformation, reflecting her growing confidence. Friends remarked on the positive change in her demeanor, assuming she had finally moved on from her painful divorce. As weeks turned into months, both women grew increasingly attached to Alton. Mandy began to fantasize about leaving her loveless marriage, imagining a future where she could pursue her art freely with Alton by her side. Delilah, having experienced the pain of a failed marriage, was more cautious but couldn't help dreaming of a fresh start with someone who truly appreciated her. Alton, for his part, became more deeply enmeshed in the web of deceit he had woven. He cared for both women and found himself unable to choose between them. The excitement of his double life began to wear thin, replaced by a constant state of anxiety and guilt. One crisp autumn evening, as Alton lay in Mandy's arms in the secret studio she had set up in her basement, she whispered words that sent a chill down his spine. "I think I'm falling in love with you." Later that same night, in Delilah's warm kitchen, she gazed at him over a cup of tea and confessed that he made her believe in love again. As Alton walked home in the dark, the weight of his actions finally began to sink in. He realized that what had started as harmless flirtation had grown into something far more complex and potentially destructive. Little did he know, the delicate balance he had been maintaining was about to come crashing down, with consequences more dire than he could have ever imagined. As autumn progressed, Alton's double life became increasingly difficult to maintain. The thrill of secret rendezvous was replaced by a constant state of anxiety and hypervigilance. Every text message, every phone call, every casual encounter in the neighborhood became a potential minefield that could expose his deception. Alton developed an elaborate system of alibis and excuses. He cited increased hours at the coffee shop, fictitious study groups for classes he wasn't taking, and non-existent volunteer work to account for his time. His phone became a source of both connection and dread, carefully managed with separate conversations and meticulously deleted message threads. The pressure began to take its toll on Alton, and his once easy smile became strained. Co-workers at the coffee shop noticed his distraction, attributing it to the stress of balancing work and school. In reality, Alton spent every moment terrified that his carefully constructed house of cards would come tumbling down. There were close calls that left Alton's heart racing. One afternoon, he was walking hand in hand with Delilah in a nearby park when he spotted Mandy in the distance. He quickly steered Delilah in the opposite direction, inventing a sudden craving for ice cream to explain their abrupt change of course. Another time, Alton was helping Mandy carry groceries into her house when Delilah drove by. He ducked behind Mandy's car, pretending to tie his shoe, praying that Delilah hadn't noticed him. The incident left him shaken, realizing how easily his deception could be exposed. As Mandy and Delilah grew more attached, they began to demand more of Alton's time and attention. Mandy, emboldened by her rediscovered passion for art and life, started to talk about leaving her husband. She painted vivid pictures of a future with Alton, filled with love and creative pursuits. These conversations left Alton simultaneously exhilarated and terrified.
Unsure of how to respond to such earnest declarations, given their age differences, Delilah, while more cautious about jumping into a serious relationship, began to integrate Alton into her life in subtle ways. She introduced him to her friends as her young neighbor, but the affectionate glances and inside jokes they shared spoke volumes. She started making plans for the holidays, hinting at wanting Alton to meet her family. The women's growing expectations added another layer of complexity to Alton's already precarious situation. He found himself making conflicting promises, agreeing to holiday plans with both women, and knowing he would inevitably disappoint one or both of them. As the pressure mounted, Alton's guilt began to manifest physically. He lost weight, his sleep was plagued by nightmares, and he developed a nervous tic, constantly checking his phone and glancing over his shoulder. He knew he needed to end at least one of the affairs, but the thought of hurting either woman was unbearable. What Alton failed to realize was that his increasingly erratic behavior was not going unnoticed. Both Mandy and Delilah, initially blinded by their feelings for him, were beginning to sense that something was amiss. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shatter the delicate balance Alton had been struggling to maintain. The facade Alton had so carefully constructed came crashing down on a chilly November evening. The annual festival was in full swing, with residents gathering in the town square for food, games, and live music. Alton had agonized over whether to attend, knowing both Mandy and Delilah would be there. In the end, he decided that his absence would be more suspicious than his presence. As Alton navigated through the crowd, he felt like walking on a tightrope. He exchanged pleasant greetings with neighbors, all the while scanning the area for signs of Mandy or Delilah. He had just begun to relax, thinking he might make it through the evening unscathed, when disaster struck. Mandy, who had been volunteering at the face-painting booth, spotted Alton and waved him over enthusiastically. As he reluctantly approached, he saw Delilah at a nearby table, arranging items for the silent auction. Time seemed to slow down as Alton watched the two women, oblivious to each other's significance, moving towards an inevitable collision. Mandy reached Alton first, greeting him with a warm hug that lingered a bit too long for mere neighbors. As she pulled away, her eyes shining with affection, Delilah appeared at Alton's side. The younger man felt the blood drain from his face as the two women sized each other up, confusion slowly giving way to suspicion. An awkward silence fell over the trio, broken only when Mandy, ever the gracious hostess, extended her hand to Delilah and introduced herself. Delilah reciprocated, her eyes darting between Mandy and Alton, noting the familiar way Mandy's hand rested on Alton's arm. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in subtext and veiled accusations. Both women, drawing on their intuition and the subtle signs they had previously dismissed, began to piece together the truth. They spoke of their close friendship with Alton, each anecdote carefully chosen to stake their claim. Alton stood frozen between them, watching helplessly as his carefully compartmentalized worlds collided. He opened his mouth several times to speak, but no words came out. His silence only served to confirm the growing suspicions of both women. The tension reached a breaking point when Mandy, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion, mentioned a unique bracelet she had given Alton, a bracelet that was at that very moment visible on his wrist. In that moment, the full extent of Alton's deception became clear to both women. Mandy's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes, while Delilah's expression hardened into one of cold fury. Without another word, both women turned and walked away, leaving Alton standing alone, the weight of his actions finally crashing down upon him. The fallout was immediate and severe. As Mandy and Delilah stormed off in opposite directions, whispers began to circulate through the festival crowd. Neighbors who had witnessed the tense exchange began to speculate, and soon the gossip spread like wildfire through Redwood. Alton, overwhelmed by the sudden exposure of his deceit, fled the festival. He spent the night pacing in his room, alternating between frantically trying to call both women and collapsing in fits of remorse and self-recrimination. The following days were a blur of confrontations and accusations. Mandy showed up at Alton's door the next morning, her eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night. Her quiet devastation was more painful to Alton than any angry outburst could have been. She spoke of betrayal, of shattered trust, and of the love she thought they had shared. When she left, Alton knew that something irreparable had broken between them. Delilah's reaction was markedly different. She refused to answer Alton's calls or texts, instead sending a scathing email that laid bare all of his lies and manipulations. Her words, sharp as knives, cut through any remaining illusions Alton had about the nobility of his actions. She made it clear that he was never to contact her again. As news of the affair spread, Alton found himself ostracized by the community he had so easily charmed just months before. Dirty looks and whispered comments followed him whenever he ventured out. His shifts at the coffee shop became exercises in endurance as he faced the judgment and curiosity of customers who had once adored him. But the worst was yet to come. 1 week after the festival, Alton received a visit from Gregory Carell, Mandy's husband. The normally composed surgeon was trembling with barely contained rage as he confronted Alton about the affair. It was clear that the exposure of Mandy's infidelity had shattered the Carells' already fragile marriage. As the dust began to settle, Alton was left to face the consequences of his actions. He had not only broken the hearts of 2 women, but had also disrupted the lives of everyone around them. The once peaceful neighborhood of Redwood had been irrevocably changed, its residents forced to confront the reality that even in their idyllic suburb, passion and deception could lead to devastating consequences. In the weeks following the revelation at the Harvest Festival, the 2 women, once friendly neighbors, now avoided each other at all costs, their shared humiliation and anger creating an invisible barrier between them. Mandy's life spiraled into chaos. Her husband, Gregory, oscillated between cold fury and desperate attempts to salvage their marriage. Their arguments, once confined to hushed tones behind closed doors, now spilled out into the open. Neighbors pretended not to notice, as shouting matches echoed through the Carells' usually quiet home. Mandy threw herself into her art with a frenetic energy, producing dark, turbulent pieces that reflected her inner turmoil. She spent hours locked in her studio, emerging only to face the wreckage of her personal life. Her once pristine appearance became disheveled, her eyes hollow with grief and lack of sleep. Delilah, on the other hand, retreated into herself. She worked from home, avoiding the pitying glances and whispered comments of her neighbors. Her brief period of renewed confidence shattered. She found herself slipping back into the insecurities that had plagued her after her divorce. Clients noticed a decline in the quality of her work, and several took their business elsewhere. As the initial shock wore off, the women's pain began to transmute into anger, not just at Alton but at each other. They began to see each other as rivals, each blaming the other for the destruction of their relationship with Alton and the upheaval in their lives. The tension between them came to a head one afternoon at the local supermarket. Mandy and Delilah found themselves face to face in the produce section, their shopping carts colliding in a jarring metaphor for their collided lives. What started as terse apologies quickly escalated into a heated exchange of accusations and insults. Delilah, her voice shaking with emotion, accused Mandy of using Alton to escape her loveless marriage. Mandy retaliated by insinuating that Delilah's desperation had made her an easy target for Alton's manipulation. The argument grew louder, drawing the attention of other shoppers, until a store manager was forced to intervene. The incident at the supermarket marked a turning point. What had been a private scandal became a public spectacle, dividing the community of Redwood. People began to take sides, some sympathizing with Mandy's marital struggles, others relating to Delilah's vulnerability as a divorcee. The women found themselves at the center of a maelstrom of gossip and judgment. As the conflict between Mandy and Delilah intensified, Alton became an almost forgotten figure in the drama. He had retreated from public life, rarely leaving his house except to go to work. When he did venture out, he kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone he passed. But the young man's attempt to fade into the background would prove futile. Unbeknownst to him, his actions had set in motion a chain of events that would culminate in a tragedy no one could have foreseen. The simmering tensions between Mandy and Delilah were about to boil over, with devastating consequences for everyone involved. The morning of November 15th dawned cold and gray, a fitting backdrop for the tragedy that was about to unfold. Across the street, Delilah Frost was awake, staring at her computer screen as she tried to focus on a project due later that day. Her work, once a source of pride and fulfillment, now felt hollow. She found herself constantly distracted by thoughts of Alton, of Mandy, of the life she had briefly thought might be possible before it all came crashing down. The catalyst for the day's events came in the form of a simple email. Delilah, in a moment of weakness, had decided to reach out to Alton. Her message was brief, a request to meet, to find some closure on their relationship. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. unaware of the chain reaction she had just set in motion. Mandy, who had taken to checking Alton's email, his password unchanged from when they were lovers, saw the message pop up in his inbox. Something inside her snapped. The thought of Alton and Delilah rekindling their relationship, of being left behind while they moved on together, was more than she could bear. In a haze of jealousy and pain, Mandy made her way to Gregory's study. She knew he kept a handgun in his desk drawer, a precaution he'd taken after a series of break-ins in the neighborhood years ago. With shaking hands, she retrieved the weapon, its weight unfamiliar and terrifying in her grasp. Meanwhile, Delilah had decided to clear her head with a walk. The crisp autumn air bit at her cheeks as she made her way down the street, lost in thought. She was so distracted that she didn't notice Mandy approaching until it was too late. Mandy confronted Delilah on the sidewalk, her words a jumble of accusations and grief. Neighbors would later recount hearing raised voices, the sound of an argument escalating rapidly. Delilah, caught off guard by Mandy's sudden appearance in evident distress, tried to calm the situation, her hands raised in a placating gesture. What happened next would be pieced together from eyewitness accounts and forensic evidence. In her heightened emotional state, Mandy produced the gun. Whether she intended to use it or merely to threaten is unclear. Delilah, seeing the weapon, made a move, either to disarm Mandy or to flee. A single shot rang out, shattering the morning quiet of Redwood. Delilah crumpled to the ground, a bloom of red spreading across her chest. Mandy stood frozen, the gun slipping from her nerveless fingers to clatter on the sidewalk. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then chaos erupted. Neighbors, drawn by the sound of the gunshot, rushed from their homes. Someone called 911, while others attempted to render first aid to the fallen Delilah. Mandy remained rooted to the spot, her face a mask of shock and horror, as the reality of what she had done began to sink in. By the time police and paramedics arrived, it was too late. Delilah Frost was pronounced dead at the scene, her life extinguished in a moment of passion and madness. Mandy offered no resistance as she was led away in handcuffs, her blank stare and tear-streaked face a stark contrast to the vibrant, confident woman she had been just months before. As news of the shooting spread, the residents of Redwood were left to grapple with the shocking turn of events. The idyllic facade of their neighborhood had been irreparably shattered, leaving in its wake a community forever changed by tragedy. The police investigation moved swiftly, with multiple witnesses and Mandy Carell's immediate surrender. There was little mystery surrounding the events of that fateful morning. However, as detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a complex web of relationships and emotions that had led to the tragic outcome. Gregory Carell, Mandy's husband, found himself thrust into an impossible situation. As a prominent member of the community, he was now faced with the public humiliation of his wife's infidelity, coupled with the horror of her actions. He retreated from public life, taking a leave of absence from the hospital where he worked. The investigation also brought to light the extent of Mandy's emotional distress in the weeks leading up to the shooting. Friends and neighbors, previously hesitant to get involved, now came forward with accounts of her erratic behavior and apparent mental decline. These revelations would later play a crucial role in her legal defense. Delilah Frost's family arrived from out of state, shell-shocked and grieving. As the investigation progressed, attention turned to the weapon used in the shooting. The gun, legally registered to Gregory Carell, had been improperly stored, raising questions about his potential liability in the incident. This development added another complex dimension to an already multifaceted case. The trial of Mandy Carell began 6 months after the shooting. The prosecution painted Mandy as a cold-blooded killer, arguing that her actions were premeditated and born of jealousy. They presented evidence of her declining mental state and the calculated retrieval of the weapon as proof of intent. The defense, however, portrayed Mandy as a victim of circumstance, a woman pushed to the brink by betrayal and emotional turmoil. They brought in expert witnesses to testify about the effects of prolonged stress and emotional trauma on decision-making. Alton Rhodes's testimony was a pivotal moment in the trial. His account of the affairs and the events leading up to the shooting provided crucial context, though his appearance on the stand was clearly painful for all involved. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Mandy Carell was found guilty of second-degree murder, a lesser charge than the prosecution had sought. The judge, taking into account the circumstances and Mandy's lack of prior criminal history, sentenced her to 18 years in prison. with the possibility of parole after 12 years. In the years following the trial, the residents of Redwood struggled to move forward. The neighborhood, once known for its tranquility, now carried the weight of tragedy. John Anderson, a well-respected local businessman, was found dead under mysterious circumstances in his home. The news spread like wildfire, leaving the townspeople in shock and disbelief. John's body was discovered by his wife, Lisa Anderson, who called the police in a state of frantic distress. The scene that awaited the detectives was both perplexing and chilling. John lay motionless in the living room, with no visible signs of struggle or forced entry. The initial examination suggested a sudden and unexplained death, but something felt off to the seasoned investigators. Detective Sarah Miller and her partner, Detective James Carter, were assigned to the case. Both experienced and diligent, they knew that in a small town like Brooksville, everyone had their secrets, and sometimes those secrets could be deadly. As they began their investigation, the townsfolk watched with bated breath, eager to know what had happened to one of their own. Rumors began to swirl as the community speculated about the cause of John's untimely demise. Some whispered about his business dealings, while others hinted at personal troubles. Little did they know that the truth was far more sinister and tangled than they could ever imagine. As the detectives delved deeper into John's life and relationships, they uncovered a web of deceit, betrayal, and hidden motives that pointed to a shocking conclusion. John Anderson was a man of many facets. At 45, he had built a successful career as the owner of a local hardware store, Anderson's Supplies, which had been a staple in Brooksville for over 2 decades. Known for his generosity and commitment to the community, John was a beloved figure in town. He often donated to local charities and sponsored youth sports teams, earning him a reputation as a pillar of Brooksville society. Despite his public persona, those who knew John well were aware of his private struggles. His marriage to Lisa had been under strain for several years. The couple had met in college and married young, but over time the passion had waned, replaced by routine and occasional arguments. Friends described John as hardworking and dedicated, but also as someone who could be distant and absorbed in his work. John's last known activities painted a picture of a man entrenched in his routine. He had spent the previous day at his store, attending to customers and managing inventory. He left work at his usual time, stopped briefly at a local diner for a cup of coffee, and then headed home. Surveillance footage confirmed that he arrived at his house at 6:45 p.m. That evening, John had planned to spend a quiet night with Lisa, watching television and discussing their upcoming vacation. However, Lisa reported that John had complained of feeling unwell shortly after dinner. He had retired to the living room to rest, and that was the last time she saw him alive. When she went to check on him later, she found him unresponsive and called 911. The initial autopsy report was inconclusive. There were no obvious signs of trauma or foul play, and toxicology results were pending. Detectives Miller and Carter knew that they had to dig deeper into John's life to uncover any potential clues that could explain his sudden death. They began by interviewing Lisa and those closest to John, hoping to piece together the events leading up to that fateful night. Lisa Anderson was the picture of grief when the detectives first interviewed her. At 42, she was a striking woman with auburn hair and piercing blue eyes, now red-rimmed from crying. Her distress seemed genuine, but Miller and Carter knew better than to take things at face value. They needed to understand her relationship with John and her potential role in his death. Lisa worked as a marketing manager for a local real estate firm, a job she had taken up after their 2 children, Jake and Emily, went off to college. Described by friends as outgoing and charismatic, Lisa was well liked in the community. However, some noted that her marriage to John had been rocky. There were rumors of arguments and a growing emotional distance between them. When questioned about the night of John's death, Lisa recounted her version of events with a tremor in her voice. She described how John had complained of feeling ill after dinner and had decided to lie down in the living room. She had given him some space, thinking he needed rest, and had gone upstairs to read. Hours later, when she didn't hear from him, she went downstairs and found him unresponsive. Lisa's reaction to John's death was complex. She expressed deep sorrow and a sense of loss, but also hinted at frustrations that had simmered beneath the surface of their marriage. She admitted that they had been going through a rough patch, but she insisted that she loved John and had hoped to work through their issues. As the detectives delved deeper, they noticed subtle inconsistencies in Lisa's statements. She seemed hesitant when discussing certain aspects of her relationship with John, and there were moments when her grief appeared almost performative. Miller and Carter decided to explore further, focusing on Lisa's personal life and relationships outside her marriage. Their investigation soon led them to Mark Benson, Lisa's coworker. Initial inquiries revealed that Lisa and Mark had been spending a lot of time together, both in and out of the office. The nature of their relationship raised eyebrows, and the detective suspected that there was more to the story than Lisa had let on. With this new lead, they began to unravel the threads of an affair that would cast a dark shadow over John's death and point to possible motives that were previously unseen. Detectives Miller and Carter arrived at the Anderson residence the morning after John's body was discovered. The house, a modest two-story home on Maple Street, was cordoned off with police tape. Forensic teams were already at work, meticulously combing through every inch of the property for clues. Miller, a seasoned detective with a keen eye for detail, started her examination in the living room where John's body had been found. The room was neat, almost eerily so. John lay on the couch, his face serene as if he were merely asleep. There were no signs of a struggle, no obvious wounds or marks on his body. The initial assessment by the medical examiner suggested that John had died of unknown causes, pending a full autopsy. Carter, Miller's partner, was outside speaking with the first responders. A burly man with a no-nonsense attitude, he had a knack for getting people to talk. He gathered statements from the paramedics and the patrol officers who had first arrived at the scene. None of them had seen anything out of the ordinary, and there were no immediate signs of forced entry or foul play. Inside, Miller turned her attention to Lisa, who sat at the kitchen table clutching a tissue. Lisa's hands trembled as she recounted the events of the previous night. Her story was consistent with what she had told the 911 operator. John had felt unwell, and she had left him to rest, only to find him unresponsive later. Miller noted the way Lisa's eyes darted around the room, avoiding direct contact. As they wrapped up their initial interviews, Miller and Carter spoke with several neighbors. Most described the Andersons as a quiet couple who kept to themselves. A few mentioned hearing arguments on occasion, but nothing that had raised significant alarm. One neighbor, Mrs. Evans, an elderly widow who lived next door, recalled seeing John the evening before. He had seemed his usual self, waving as he walked to his front door. Back at the station, the detectives reviewed their notes. They compiled a list of potential witnesses and persons of interest, starting with Lisa and expanding to friends, family, and co-workers. The preliminary evidence didn't point clearly in any direction, but Miller and Carter were determined to leave no stone unturned. Forensic analysis began to yield some results. The autopsy confirmed that John had not suffered from any external injuries. Toxicology tests, however, revealed trace amounts of a foreign substance in his system. This finding raised new questions about whether John's death was natural or if he had been deliberately poisoned. The detectives considered the possibility of an accidental overdose, but decided to focus on investigating any potential foul play. Meanwhile, Miller and Carter continued to scrutinize Lisa's behavior and background. They requested her phone records and financial statements, looking for any anomalies. Lisa's initial shock and sorrow seemed genuine, but the detectives knew that grief could mask many things. They needed to understand her motives, her relationships, and her state of mind in the weeks leading up to John's death. Their investigation soon took a critical turn when they discovered a series of text messages between Lisa and her coworker, Mark Benson. The messages hinted at a relationship that was far more intimate than just colleagues. This revelation provided a new perspective on the case and prompted the detectives to delve deeper into Lisa's affair with Mark, exploring how it might connect to John's untimely demise. The discovery of Lisa's affair with Mark Benson was a turning point in the investigation. The text messages between them were explicit and left little doubt about the nature of their relationship. Mark, a suave and charming man in his early 40s, worked with Lisa at the real estate firm, and it was clear that their connection went beyond professional boundaries. Detectives Miller and Carter decided to bring Lisa in for a second round of questioning. This time, they confronted her with the evidence of her affair. Lisa initially denied any wrongdoing, But when presented with the text messages, she broke down. Through tears, she admitted to the affair, claiming that it had started several months earlier. She insisted, however, that it had nothing to do with John's death. Lisa explained that she had felt lonely and unappreciated in her marriage. John had become increasingly distant, more focused on his business than on their relationship. She sought comfort and companionship in Mark, who was attentive and understanding. The affair had been an escape, a way for her to feel alive again, but she maintained that she had never wanted any harm to come to John. Miller and Carter knew that affairs could be powerful motivators for murder, but they needed more concrete evidence to link Lisa or Mark to John's death. They decided to bring Mark in for questioning. Mark was cooperative but nervous. He confirmed the affair, describing it as a whirlwind romance that had provided solace to both him and Lisa. He claimed that he had no knowledge of John's death and had been at home on the night it happened, a fact that they would need to verify. As the detectives delved deeper into the affair, they discovered that Lisa and Mark had been planning to start a new life together. Emails and further text messages revealed discussions about leaving Brooksville and moving to a different city. They had even looked into potential properties and job opportunities elsewhere. This painted a picture of a couple desperate to escape their current lives, raising further suspicions about their involvement in John's death. The affair added a layer of complexity to the case. Lisa's motive seemed clear. If she were free from her marriage, she could be with Mark without the stigma of divorce in their conservative community. However, Miller and Carter needed to establish a link between the affair and John's death. They began by re-examining the toxicology report, looking for any substances that could be traced back to Lisa or Mark. The detectives also started to scrutinize Mark's background more closely. They discovered that he had a history of financial troubles and had recently been involved in a legal dispute with a former employer. This revelation suggested that Mark might have had his own motives for wanting John out of the picture, particularly if he believed that Lisa could provide financial stability. With these new leads, Miller and Carter were determined to uncover the truth. They needed to build a case that connected the dots between the affair, the motives, and the opportunity for either Lisa or Mark to have orchestrated John's death. The stakes were high, and the pressure was mounting. But the detectives were resolute in their pursuit of justice. Mark Benson presented himself as a confident and composed individual. But under the scrutiny of the detectives, cracks began to appear in his facade. Mark was a real estate agent who had joined the same firm as Lisa a year prior. At 41, he was known for his charm and persuasive skills, which had earned him a reputation as one of the top agents in Brooksville. However, his personal life was far less stable. During his interview, Mark maintained that his relationship with Lisa was purely about mutual emotional support. He admitted to falling in love with her, but insisted that they had no plans to harm John. He claimed to have been at his apartment on the night of John's death, providing an alibi that the detectives would need to verify. As Miller and Carter dug into Mark's background, they found several red flags. Mark had moved to Brooksville after a series of failed business ventures in larger cities. He had accumulated significant debt and had been sued by a former business partner over a failed investment. Financial records showed that Mark was living beyond his means, struggling to keep up with his debts and maintain his lifestyle. Further investigation into Mark's phone records and emails revealed frequent, secretive communications with Lisa. They often discussed their dissatisfaction with their current lives and fantasized about a future together. In one particularly revealing email, Mark wrote about his desperation to start anew and his frustration with the obstacles in their way. While this was not direct evidence of a murder plot, it added to the narrative that he had a strong motive to eliminate John. The detectives also uncovered that Mark had recently taken out a sizable life insurance policy on himself, naming Lisa as the beneficiary. This discovery was particularly suspicious, suggesting that Mark might have been planning for a future that included financial security, possibly derived from Lisa's newfound widowhood. To verify Mark's alibi, Miller and Carter visited his apartment complex. The building manager confirmed that Mark had been seen entering his apartment around 7 p.m. on the night of John's death, but there were no witnesses to confirm his presence there for the entire evening. This left a window of opportunity that the detectives couldn't ignore. As they continued to interrogate Mark, his story began to show inconsistencies. He stumbled over details about his whereabouts and interactions with Lisa. Miller and Carter pressed harder, using psychological tactics to unsettle him. Mark's composure started to fray, and he became increasingly defensive. In a tense moment during questioning, Mark blurted out that Lisa had been the one to suggest they could be together sooner if John were out of the picture. This accusation shifted the focus back to Lisa and raised questions about who was truly orchestrating the events leading up to John's death. Was Mark trying to deflect blame, or was there a more sinister conspiracy at play? With both Lisa and Mark under intense scrutiny, the detectives faced the challenge of untangling a web of lies, motives, and opportunities. They needed more concrete evidence to determine whether one or both of them were responsible for John's death. As they continued their investigation, they hoped that the next piece of the puzzle would bring them closer to the truth. As the investigation progressed, Miller and Carter encountered numerous twists and turns that complicated the case. New evidence surfaced, leading them down unexpected paths and challenging their initial assumptions. Each revelation brought them closer to the truth, but also raised more questions. One such twist came when the toxicology report was finalized. The foreign substance found in John's system was identified as a rare, fast-acting poison. This poison was not something one could easily acquire, pointing to a premeditated act rather than an accidental overdose. The detectives now had concrete evidence that John's death was a murder, and they needed to find out who had access to such a substance. Their inquiries led them to a local pharmacy where the poison had been purchased. The pharmacist remembered selling the substance to a man matching Mark's description, but there was no solid proof linking Mark directly to the purchase. This added another layer of suspicion, but was not enough to make an arrest. While following up on the lead at the pharmacy, the detectives received an anonymous tip. The caller claimed to have seen Lisa meeting with a man in a secluded park shortly before John's death. This information suggested that Lisa might have been plotting something clandestine, possibly involving Mark. The detectives traced the call, but found that it originated from a disposable phone, making it impossible to identify the source. Simultaneously, a surprising piece of evidence emerged from John's business dealings. Financial records indicated that John had recently transferred a significant sum of money to an unknown account. Further investigation revealed that this account belonged to a private investigator named Alex Thompson. When questioned, Thompson disclosed that John had hired him to follow Lisa, suspecting her of infidelity. This revelation painted a picture of a man who was not only aware of his wife's affair, but also taking steps to gather evidence. The private investigator's report included photos and detailed logs of Lisa's meetings with Mark. These documents confirmed the affair, but also contained troubling information about Lisa's behavior. According to Thompson, Lisa had been acting erratically in recent weeks, frequently discussing her unhappiness and expressing anger towards John. In one recorded conversation, she mentioned feeling trapped and hinted at wanting to escape her marriage by any means necessary. This new evidence prompted Miller and Carter to reevaluate their approach. They decided to conduct a thorough search of the Anderson home, hoping to find something that might link Lisa or Mark directly to the murder. During the search, they discovered a hidden compartment in Lisa's closet, containing vials of the same rare poison found in John's system. This discovery was damning and suggested Lisa's direct involvement in the crime. Confronted with this evidence, Lisa's demeanor shifted. She became defensive and hostile, accusing the detectives of trying to frame her. She insisted that she had no knowledge of the poison and that someone must have planted it to incriminate her. However, just as the detectives felt they were closing in on a resolution, another twist emerged. Mark Benson came forward with new information, claiming that Lisa had manipulated him into helping her acquire the poison. He provided emails and messages in which Lisa discussed her plan to poison John, making it appear as though Mark was a reluctant accomplice rather than the mastermind. With conflicting stories from Lisa and Mark, Miller and Carter faced a complex challenge. They needed to determine who was telling the truth and who was orchestrating a cover-up. The investigation had revealed a tangled web of deceit, motives, and opportunities, but the exact sequence of events leading to John's death remained elusive. Conversely, Mark's narrative painted him as a pawn in Lisa's scheme. He described how Lisa had gradually introduced the idea of poisoning John, making it seem like a desperate measure to free herself from an unbearable situation. He admitted to helping her obtain the poison, but insisted that he had never intended for John to die. His portrayal of Lisa as the mastermind added another layer of complexity to the case. To uncover the truth, the detectives decided to conduct a final round of intense interrogations. They hoped to catch one or both suspects in a lie, or reveal inconsistencies that could break the case wide open. Miller and Carter knew that the key to solving the murder lay in understanding the true nature of the relationship between Lisa and Mark and the depth of their motives. In a tense interview, Lisa finally broke down. She admitted that she had felt trapped in her marriage and saw no way out other than eliminating John. However, she insisted that Mark had been an active participant, encouraging her to go through with the plan. Her confession provided crucial insight into her state of mind and her willingness to commit murder to achieve her goals. With this new information, the detectives turned their attention back to Mark. They confronted him with Lisa's confession, hoping to provoke a reaction. Mark, realizing that his attempts to deflect blame were failing, began to unravel. He confessed to helping Lisa, but maintained that she had manipulated him from the start. The confessions from both suspects provided a clearer picture of the motives and events leading up to John's death. The detectives now had to piece together the final puzzle and determine how to proceed with arrests and charges, ensuring that justice would be served. The breakthrough in the case came when the detectives re-examined the timeline and physical evidence one last time. They discovered a crucial piece of evidence that had initially been overlooked: a security camera from a neighbor's house that captured a portion of the Andersons' backyard. The footage revealed Mark entering the Anderson home on the night of John's death, contradicting his alibi and providing a direct link between him and the crime scene. The jury deliberated for several days before returning a guilty verdict for both Lisa and Mark. Lisa was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, while Mark received a slightly lesser sentence due to his perceived secondary role in the crime. The community of Brooksville was left to grapple with the aftermath of the tragedy, but there was a sense of closure as justice had been served. John Harrison, a respected local businessman, was found murdered in his own home. The evidence soon pointed towards his wife, Emily, sparking a scandal that would unravel a complex web of lies, twisted love triangles, deceit, and dark secrets. Emily Harrison, a beautiful woman in her mid-30s, had always been the center of attention. Her previous marriage to Michael Turner had ended amicably, or so it seemed. John, her current husband, had a strained relationship with his younger brother, David. This strained dynamic hid deeper, more sinister connections that would come to light as the investigation unfolded. The murder of John Harrison was not a straightforward case. It was the catalyst that exposed a convoluted love triangle, revealing that everyone involved had motives buried beneath layers of pretense and propriety. Detective Sarah Miller and her partner, Detective Tom Reynolds, would soon find themselves entangled in a case that defied simple explanations. The night of the murder, Emily's scream pierced the quiet neighborhood. The first responders arrived at the Harrison residence to find Emily in a state of hysteria, her clothes stained with blood. John's body lay sprawled on the living room floor, a deep gash across his throat. Blood pooled around him, soaking into the carpet. The scene was chaotic, with furniture overturned and signs of a struggle evident. Officer Daniels, the first on the scene, quickly secured the area. He observed Emily, who was sobbing uncontrollably, clutching a framed photo of her and John. Her hands trembled as she tried to explain what had happened. "I found him like this. I came home and he was just lying there. I didn't know what to do." Her voice was shaky, her eyes wide with terror, but there was something in her demeanor that didn't quite add up. She was too composed, too rehearsed. Detective Miller arrived shortly after, her keen eyes taking in every detail. She noted the absence of forced entry and the fact that John seemed to have been caught off guard. It suggested that he knew his attacker. Miller's gut instinct told her that this was more than just a burglary gone wrong. As the forensic team began their work, Miller pulled Emily aside for a more detailed statement. Emily recounted her day, carefully avoiding eye contact. She claimed to have been out shopping and returned to find John dead. But there were inconsistencies in her story, small details that didn't align. Detective Reynolds joined Miller, his expression grim. He had spoken with the neighbors, who reported hearing raised voices earlier in the evening. None could identify the second voice, But it was clear that John had not been alone before his death. Miller looked at Reynolds. "This isn't a simple case, Tom. There's more to this than meets the eye." Reynolds nodded in agreement. "Let's dig deeper. Something tells me we're only scratching the surface." The investigation into John Harrison's murder kicked off in earnest the following day. Detectives Miller and Reynolds began their meticulous process of gathering evidence and conducting interviews. The first step was to build a timeline of John's final hours. They discovered that John had left his office around 5 p.m., a bit earlier than usual. His assistant mentioned that he seemed preoccupied, almost distracted. Emily's account placed her at the local mall during this time, but there were no security camera records to confirm her presence. Detective Miller focused on Emily's behavior. She seemed cooperative, yet there was an underlying current of tension. During questioning, Emily maintained her story but frequently glanced at her phone as if expecting a message or call. Miller made a mental note to check her phone records. Meanwhile, Reynolds delved into John's professional life. As a successful real estate developer, John had made a few enemies. Business rivals and disgruntled former employees formed a list of potential suspects. However, none seemed to have a motive strong enough for murder. As they dug deeper, the detectives learned more about Emily's past. Her previous marriage to Michael Turner had ended 5 years ago. The divorce was amicable on paper, but whispers of infidelity and financial disputes lingered. Michael had moved out of town but returned occasionally, supposedly to visit his daughter from another relationship. Detective Miller decided to pay Michael a visit. He lived in a modest apartment on the outskirts of Willow Creek. Michael was a tall, brooding man with a rugged charm. He appeared genuinely shocked when Miller informed him of John's murder. "Emily called me last night," he said, his voice tinged with concern. "She was hysterical, said John was dead. I told her to call the police and then I rushed over. But by the time I got there, the place was crawling with cops. Michael's alibi was shaky, but there was no concrete evidence linking him to the crime." Miller noted his reaction and decided to keep him under surveillance. Back at the station, Reynolds had uncovered a new lead. David Harrison, John's younger brother, had been seen arguing with John several days before the murder. David, a charming but aimless man, had always lived in his brother's shadow. He harbored a deep resentment towards John, fueled by jealousy and financial dependence. David was brought in for questioning. He was visibly nervous, his eyes darting around the room as he spoke. "John and I argued about money," he admitted. "He was going to cut me off, but I didn't kill him." The detectives were skeptical. David's alibi for the night of the murder was weak. He claimed to have been at a bar, but no one could confirm his presence. As they continued to press him, David's story began to unravel. Emily's suspicious behavior, Michael's shaky alibi, and David's deep-seated resentment formed a tangled web. The detectives realized they were dealing with more than just a crime of passion. There were layers of deceit and hidden motives that needed to be peeled back, one by one. John and Emily Harrison appeared to be the quintessential suburban couple. They had a beautiful home, a successful business, and were well-liked in their community. But beneath the veneer of their perfect life, cracks were beginning to show. John had built his real estate empire from the ground up. He was known for his business acumen and ruthless negotiating tactics. However, his professional success came at a personal cost. John's demanding work schedule left little time for his marriage, creating a rift between him and Emily. Emily, on the other hand, had a more complex past. Raised in a wealthy family, she was accustomed to a life of privilege. Her first marriage to Michael Turner had been a whirlwind romance. Michael was a charismatic entrepreneur, but his business ventures often ended in failure. Their relationship was passionate but tumultuous, marked by frequent arguments and infidelity. The divorce had been bitter, with Emily accusing Michael of cheating and financial mismanagement. Michael, in turn, claimed that Emily's spending habits had driven him to the brink of bankruptcy. Despite the acrimony, they managed to part ways without too much public scandal. Michael left town, but he never completely severed ties with Emily. John entered Emily's life shortly after her divorce. He offered stability and security, something she desperately needed. Their courtship was swift, and they married within a year. However, the transition from a tumultuous relationship to a stable one was not easy for Emily. She missed the excitement and unpredictability that Michael had brought into her life. David Harrison, John's younger brother, was another significant figure in the unfolding drama. David had always been the black sheep of the family. He struggled with various addictions and had a string of failed business ventures. John often bailed him out, creating a sense of dependency and resentment. David's relationship with Emily was complex. They had an undeniable chemistry, and their interactions were often charged with unspoken tension. Emily confided in David about her marital problems, and he, in turn, found solace in her company. It was clear to the detectives that there was more to their relationship than met the eye. As Miller and Reynolds dug deeper, they discovered that John had recently made some significant financial moves. He had taken out a large life insurance policy and transferred substantial assets into Emily's name. These actions suggested that John was either planning for the future or anticipating something dire. Emily's spending habits had also come under scrutiny. Despite her outward appearance of concern and grief, her bank records revealed large withdrawals and unexplained expenses. The detectives began to suspect that she might have been planning to leave John and start a new life elsewhere. Michael Turner, though seemingly out of the picture, still harbored feelings for Emily. He had recently come back into town and had been seen meeting with her on several occasions. Their interactions were friendly on the surface, but there was an undercurrent of unresolved tension and unspoken words. The background checks painted a picture of a marriage on the brink, with each character hiding their true intentions behind a facade of normalcy. John was the pillar of the community, Emily the perfect wife, David the troubled brother, and Michael the ex-husband with lingering feelings. But as the detectives would soon discover, appearances could be deceiving. As the investigation progressed, the detectives focused on uncovering the motives behind John Harrison's murder. Each of the main players had reasons, both hidden and overt, that could drive them to such an extreme act. Emily's financial troubles were the most glaring. Despite John's success, their finances were strained. Emily's lavish lifestyle had put them in significant debt. The large life insurance policy John had recently taken out added a sinister layer to this financial stress. If Emily were to benefit from John's death, it would solve all her money problems. Emily's affair with David complicated matters further. Their relationship was more than just a fleeting romance. It was a deeply emotional bond, forged out of mutual dissatisfaction and dependency. Michael Turner also had a motive. His lingering feelings for Emily and the unresolved bitterness from their divorce created a volatile mix. Michael's financial instability made him susceptible to desperate measures. His frequent visits to Emily hinted at a rekindled relationship, which could have easily turned into a conspiracy against John. David's resentment towards his brother was well documented. He had lived in John's shadow for most of his life, relying on him for financial support. The argument they had days before the murder centered on money and control. John had threatened to cut David off, a move that would leave him destitute. David's dependence on John created a deep-seated hatred that could have driven him to murder. The detectives also considered the possibility of a joint effort between Emily and David. Their affair, coupled with their financial motives, made them prime suspects. If they conspired together, they could both benefit immensely from John's death. Emily would gain financial freedom, and David would rid himself of his brother's dominance. One evening, Detective Miller received a call from a local bartender who claimed to have seen Emily and David together on the night of the murder. According to the bartender, they appeared to be in an intense conversation, their body language suggesting more than just a casual encounter. This new information put both Emily and David at the scene of the crime around the estimated time of death. Miller and Reynolds brought Emily in for further questioning. Confronted with the bartender's testimony, Emily's composure began to crack. She admitted to meeting David, but insisted they were discussing her troubled marriage and had nothing to do with John's death. David, on the other hand, was less forthcoming. When questioned about his whereabouts, he became defensive and evasive. His alibi, which had already been weak, now seemed even more questionable. The detectives pressed him on his relationship with Emily and the nature of their conversation that night, but David stuck to his story of innocence. Michael Turner also remained a person of interest. His frequent visits to Emily, coupled with his financial troubles, made him a viable suspect. In the midst of these revelations, the detectives encountered several red herrings. One such distraction came in the form of an anonymous tip, suggesting that John was involved in illegal activities. The tip claimed that John had been laundering money through his real estate business. While this lead initially seemed promising, further investigation revealed it to be unfounded. It appeared to be a deliberate attempt to divert the detectives' attention from the true motives behind the murder. Another false lead came from a disgruntled former employee of John's. The employee had a history of making threats against John and had been fired under contentious circumstances. However, after a thorough investigation, it became clear that he had no involvement in the murder. His threats were merely empty words born out of frustration and resentment. The turning point came when Detective Reynolds discovered a series of text messages between Emily and Michael. The messages revealed a rekindling of their romantic relationship and discussed plans to meet secretly. One message in particular stood out. Sent on the day of the murder, it read, "We need to act tonight. John can't find out." Armed with this new evidence, Miller and Reynolds confronted Emily and Michael separately. Emily broke down under the pressure, partially confessing to the affair but denying any involvement in the murder. Michael, however, maintained his innocence, insisting that the messages were taken out of context. The breakthrough in the case came when Detective Miller decided to take a closer look at the phone records and financial transactions. She believed that these would provide the concrete evidence needed to tie the suspects to the crime. The phone records revealed a flurry of calls and messages between Emily, David, and Michael in the days leading up to the murder. The communication pattern suggested a coordinated effort, with Emily at the center. On the night of the murder, there were several calls between Emily and David, as well as a brief call to Michael. This triangulation of communication placed all three suspects in contact during the critical hours. Miller also discovered an unusual transaction in Emily's bank account. A large sum of money had been transferred to an offshore account just days before John's death. This transaction, combined with the life insurance policy, suggested that Emily was preparing for a significant change in her financial situation. Armed with this new evidence, the detectives decided to confront Emily once more. This time they presented her with the phone records and the financial transactions. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Emily's facade of innocence began to crumble. Emily's voice trembled as she spoke. "I didn't want it to come to this. I just wanted out. John was controlling, suffocating. I needed a way out, but I never wanted him dead." Miller pressed further. "Who did you talk to that night, Emily? Why were you and David in contact so frequently?" Emily hesitated, her eyes welling with tears. "David and I, we had a plan. We were going to leave John, start fresh, but I swear we never planned to kill him." The detectives knew they needed to hear David's side of the story. When they brought him in for questioning, David initially denied any involvement, but when confronted with the phone records and Emily's partial confession, his resolve weakened. David admitted to meeting Emily on the night of the murder, but claimed that their plan was only to confront John, not to harm him. Emily had convinced him that John would never let her go, and that they needed to make him understand that their relationship was over. Michael's involvement became clearer as the detectives reviewed his financial records. They discovered that he had received a substantial sum of money from an unknown source shortly after John's death. This payment, coupled with the text messages, suggested that Michael was part of the conspiracy. The detectives decided to bring all three suspects in together. In a tense confrontation, they laid out the evidence. Emily's breakdown, David's nervousness, and Michael's defiance created a volatile atmosphere. Miller addressed them. "We know about the affair. We know about the money. It's time to come clean. Who killed John?" Emily, tears streaming down her face, finally confessed. "It was an accident. We confronted John, things got heated, and David lost control. He didn't mean to kill him." David's face paled as he stammered, "It was self-defense. John attacked me and I just reacted. I didn't mean for it to end this way." Michael, realizing the gravity of the situation, added, "I was supposed to help them disappear after. I never thought it would go this far." The detectives had the pieces they needed. The confrontation had turned violent, leading to John's accidental death. Emily and David had panicked, and Michael had stepped in to help cover it up. The murder was a tragic result of a plan gone horribly wrong. With the confessions in hand, the detectives knew they had uncovered the truth. The case was far from simple, but the tangled motives and relationships had finally come to light. The truth was a web of love, betrayal, and desperation. The final confrontation with Emily, David, and Michael marked the culmination of weeks of intense investigation. Detectives Miller and Reynolds had pieced together the intricate puzzle of John Harrison's murder. The courtroom was packed as the trial of Emily, David, and Michael began. The community of Willow Creek, once known for its tranquility, was now a hub of media attention. Reporters and spectators alike were eager to hear the sordid details of the case that had shocked the town. The prosecution laid out a compelling narrative. They described how Emily's affair with David had rekindled old passions and how their relationship had become a desperate escape from her controlling marriage. The prosecution argued that the financial troubles and the life insurance policy created a powerful motive for murder. Emily's defense attorney tried to paint her as a victim of circumstances, a woman trapped in a loveless marriage who made poor decisions in a moment of panic. They emphasized that the murder was unplanned and that Emily had no intention of killing her husband. David's defense focused on self-defense. They highlighted John's aggressive behavior and his attack on David, arguing that David had acted out of fear for his life. They portrayed him as a man pushed to his breaking point by years of familial tension and resentment. Michael's defense was the most straightforward. They claimed he had no prior knowledge of the murder plan and that his involvement was limited to helping Emily out of misguided loyalty. He was depicted as an unwitting accomplice, caught up in a situation beyond his control. Throughout the trial, the detectives' meticulous work came to light. The phone records, financial transactions, and confessions all painted a vivid picture of the events leading up to John's death. The jury listened intently as the prosecution and defense presented their cases. On the stand, Emily was a picture of remorse. She recounted the night of the murder in vivid detail, her voice breaking as she described the confrontation with John. Tears streamed down her face as she spoke of her regret and fear. "I loved John," she said, her voice trembling, "but I felt trapped. When David and I confronted him, everything spiraled out of control. I never wanted this to happen." David's testimony was equally emotional. He described the years of living in John's shadow, the constant feeling of inadequacy, and the moment of terror when John attacked him. "I just wanted to protect myself," he said, his voice cracking. "I never meant to kill him. It was an accident." Michael, in his testimony, admitted to helping Emily cover up the murder, but insisted he had no part in the actual killing. "I made a terrible mistake," he said. "I thought I was helping a friend, but I realize now how wrong I was." The prosecution's closing argument was powerful. They emphasized the premeditation involved in the affair and the financial motives. They argued that while the murder might not have been meticulously planned, it was the result of a series of deliberate actions taken by Emily and David. The defense's closing arguments focused on the emotional and psychological aspects of the case. They pleaded for leniency, highlighting the lack of premeditation and the complex web of emotions that led to the tragic event. After several days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Emily and David were found guilty of second-degree murder, acknowledging the crime's emotional context, but also the gravity of their actions. Michael was found guilty of being an accessory after the fact, his role in the cover-up undeniable, but his involvement in the murder itself less clear. As the verdicts were read, the courtroom was silent. Emily Harrison was sentenced to 20 years in prison. David Harrison received a 15-year sentence. Michael Turner, though less directly involved, was sentenced to 5 years for his role in the cover-up. The twisted love triangle that led to John Harrison's murder had unraveled, but its impact would be felt for years to come. The truth, once uncovered, had brought justice, but it had also revealed the depths of human frailty and the devastating consequences of unchecked desires. The quiet town of Greenfield was shaken to its core when the body of Jack Thompson was discovered in his modest home on the outskirts of town. Jack, a well-liked middle-aged man known for his generosity and calm demeanor, had recently gone through a tumultuous divorce from his wife, Layla. The divorce, finalized just months prior, had left Jack visibly strained, but no one could have anticipated the tragic end he would meet. Layla Thompson, once the high school sweetheart and longtime partner of Jack, had quickly moved on after their split. She found solace in Derek Stone, a charismatic yet troubled man with a shadowy past. Derek, a former convict with a history of violent offenses, had swept Layla off her feet, bringing a sense of danger and excitement into her life that she had never experienced before. The discovery of Jack's lifeless body under suspicious circumstances set off a whirlwind investigation that uncovered a tangled web of deceit, betrayal, and revenge. The love triangle between Jack,
Layla and Derek became the focal point of the investigation, revealing dark secrets and motives that lay hidden beneath the surface. Greenfield's local police force, led by Detective Sarah Lawson, was tasked with untangling the complex relationships and finding the truth behind Jack's untimely death. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that this was not just a simple case of a crime of passion, but a meticulously planned act of vengeance. In the weeks that followed, the town would witness shocking revelations and unexpected twists, as the true nature of the relationships between Jack, Layla, and Derek came to light. The line between victim and perpetrator blurred, leaving everyone to wonder who could be trusted and who was hiding the darkest secrets. Jack and Layla Thompson's marriage had once been the epitome of stability and love. They had met in high school, their romance blossoming over the years into a marriage that seemed unbreakable. Jack, a kind-hearted man with a steady job as a schoolteacher, had always been the rock in their relationship. Layla, a nurse at the local hospital, complemented his steadiness with her nurturing and compassionate nature. However, as the years passed, the spark in their relationship began to fade. The stresses of daily life, combined with their inability to have children, placed a strain on their marriage. Layla's desire for excitement and change grew, leading her to seek solace outside their relationship. This quest for something new ultimately led her to Derek Stone. Derek Stone was a man with a troubled past. He had spent several years in prison for armed robbery and assault, but upon his release, he had vowed to turn his life around. His rugged good looks and charm quickly won Layla over, offering her the thrill and unpredictability she craved. Derek's presence in her life provided a stark contrast to the stability she had known with Jack. The affair between Layla and Derek was passionate and intense, leading to the eventual breakdown of her marriage to Jack. The divorce was bitter, with accusations and recriminations flying from both sides. Jack was devastated, unable to comprehend how the woman he had loved for so long could betray him in such a manner. Layla, on the other hand, felt liberated, ready to start a new chapter with Derek. Despite his attempts to move on, Jack found it difficult to let go of the past. He remained deeply in love with Layla, his heart aching at the thought of her with another man. His friends and colleagues noticed the change in him, his once cheerful demeanor replaced by a quiet sadness. Jack's attempts to rekindle his relationship with Layla were met with hostility, further deepening his despair. Derek, meanwhile, harbored his own grudges. He resented Jack for the hold he still seemed to have over Layla, and his violent tendencies began to resurface. Derek's jealousy and possessiveness became more pronounced, leading to frequent arguments with Layla. Despite this, Layla remained committed to Derek, convinced that their love was worth the turmoil. As the months passed, the tension between Jack, Layla, and Derek grew, setting the stage for the tragic events that were about to unfold. The love triangle, fraught with jealousy and resentment, would soon explode in a manner that would shock the entire town of Greenfield and leave a trail of devastation in its wake. The crisp autumn morning was shattered by the piercing scream of Mrs. Henderson, Jack's elderly neighbor, as she discovered his lifeless body sprawled across the living room floor. She had come over to check on Jack after noticing that his mail had piled up over the past few days. Her concern quickly turned to horror as she stumbled upon the gruesome scene. The local police were called immediately, and within minutes Detective Sarah Lawson and her team arrived at the scene. The sight that greeted them was both disturbing and puzzling. Jack's body lay in a pool of blood, his face contorted in a grimace of pain. There were signs of a violent struggle, with furniture overturned and broken glass scattered across the floor. As the forensic team began their meticulous work, Detective Lawson interviewed Mrs. Henderson. The elderly woman, still visibly shaken, recounted her discovery and her interactions with Jack in the days leading up to his death. She mentioned hearing raised voices coming from Jack's house a few nights before, but she had assumed it was just another argument between him and Layla. Layla and Derek were quickly brought in for questioning. Layla appeared distraught, her eyes red from crying. Derek, on the other hand, was stoic, his expression unreadable. Detective Lawson noted the stark contrast between the two, her instincts telling her that there was more to their story than met the eye. Layla recounted her last interaction with Jack. She claimed that she had not seen him for several days, and that their last conversation had been about finalizing the sale of their former home. Derek corroborated Layla's account, stating that they had spent the night of Jack's death at his apartment, miles away from the crime scene. Despite their alibis,
Detective Lawson couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She ordered a thorough search of Derek's apartment and began to dig deeper into his past. The initial results of the forensic analysis pointed towards a struggle, with Jack having put up a significant fight against his attacker. There were signs of blunt force trauma to his head, suggesting that he had been struck multiple times with a heavy object. The discovery of a bloodied baseball bat in Jack's garage further complicated the investigation. The bat had Jack's fingerprints on it, but there were also smudges that suggested someone else had handled it. Detective Lawson sent the bat to the lab for further analysis, hoping it would provide a crucial lead. The townspeople of Greenfield were abuzz with speculation. Theories ranged from a robbery gone wrong to a crime of passion. Jack's friends and colleagues were interviewed, painting a picture of a man who was deeply troubled but not without enemies. Layla and Derek's tumultuous relationship became a focal point of the investigation, with many suspecting that their involvement went beyond just an affair. Detective Lawson knew that unraveling the truth behind Jack's death would require piecing together the fragmented lives of the people involved. The love triangle between Jack, Layla, and Derek was fraught with complexities, and she was determined to uncover every hidden detail, no matter how dark or disturbing. The investigation into Jack Thompson's murder began in earnest, with Detective Sarah Lawson leading the charge. Her first step was to establish a timeline of events leading up to Jack's death. She and her team interviewed neighbors, friends, and family, piecing together the last known movements of Jack, Layla, and Derek. The neighbors provided a wealth of information. Several had heard loud arguments coming from Jack's house in the days before his death. One neighbor, Mr. Parker, reported seeing a shadowy figure lurking around Jack's property late at night, although he couldn't provide a clear description. Another neighbor, Mrs. Green, mentioned seeing Layla leave Jack's house in a hurry the day before his body was found. Detective Lawson interviewed Layla's colleagues at the hospital, who described her as a dedicated nurse, but noted that she had become increasingly distracted and agitated in recent months. One colleague, Susan, recalled Layla confiding in her about the stress of her divorce and her volatile relationship with Derek. Susan mentioned that Layla had expressed fear for her safety on several occasions, hinting at Derek's violent tendencies. The investigation also delved into Derek's background. Detective Lawson discovered that Derek had a history of violence and had been in and out of prison for various offenses, including assault and armed robbery. She interviewed some of Derek's former associates, who painted a picture of a man prone to explosive outbursts and a deep-seated need for control. One former associate, Mike, mentioned that Derek had often talked about exacting revenge on anyone who wronged him. Despite Derek's troubling past, his alibi for the night of Jack's murder seemed solid. However, Detective Lawson couldn't ignore the mounting evidence that suggested he had a motive for wanting Jack out of the picture. The discovery of Jack's blood on Derek's shoes, found during the search of his apartment, further fueled her suspicions. Layla's inconsistent statements also raised red flags. During her initial interview, she had claimed not to have seen Jack for days. However, Mrs. Green's account contradicted this, placing Layla at Jack's house the day before his death. When confronted with this discrepancy, Layla became defensive, insisting that she had only gone to collect some personal belongings and had left after a brief argument. As the investigation progressed, Detective Lawson uncovered a series of text messages between Layla and Derek that suggested they had discussed plans to confront Jack about his continued interference in their relationship. The messages hinted at a growing frustration with Jack and a desire to put an end to the constant conflict. Despite the mounting evidence, the case was far from straightforward. Detective Lawson knew that she needed more concrete proof to build a solid case against Derek and Layla. She ordered a thorough analysis of the crime scene, hoping to find forensic evidence that would link them directly to Jack's murder. The community of Greenfield watched anxiously as the investigation unfolded. The once quiet town was now the center of a media frenzy, with reporters flocking to cover the sensational story. The pressure on Detective Lawson and her team was immense, but she remained steadfast in her determination to uncover the truth and bring justice to Jack Thompson. As the investigation into Jack Thompson's murder deepened, suspicions surrounding Layla and Derek grew more pronounced. Detective Lawson and her team scrutinized every detail, piecing together the puzzle that seemed to implicate both Layla and Derek in Jack's death. Layla's behavior became increasingly erratic. Her initial grief gave way to a defensive and hostile attitude during subsequent interviews, When questioned about her presence at Jack's house, she provided conflicting accounts, further muddying the waters. Her colleagues at the hospital noted her frequent absences and whispered conversations on her phone, fueling speculation about her involvement in something sinister. Detective Lawson also focused on Derek's suspicious behavior. Despite his alibi, there were inconsistencies that couldn't be ignored. Derek had claimed to be at his apartment on the night of the murder, but surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showed his car on the road during the time frame in question. The footage, though grainy, provided enough evidence to warrant further investigation. The discovery of Jack's blood on Derek's shoes was a significant breakthrough. Forensic analysis confirmed that the blood matched Jack's, placing Derek at the crime scene. When confronted with this evidence, Derek's composure cracked. He denied any involvement, claiming that he had been framed, but his increasingly erratic behavior only deepened Detective Lawson's suspicions. Layla's phone records revealed a series of heated exchanges between her and Derek in the days leading up to Jack's murder. The messages hinted at a plan to confront Jack and put an end to the constant turmoil he was causing in their lives. The tone of the messages grew more aggressive, with Derek urging Layla to take decisive action. One particular message stood out. Derek had texted Layla the night before the murder, saying, "It's time we take care of this once and for all." Layla's response was cryptic, but seemed to indicate her agreement. The messages provided a chilling glimpse into the escalating tension between the three individuals. Detective Lawson's team also uncovered financial records that revealed Layla had recently taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Jack. The policy, worth a significant amount, named Layla as the sole beneficiary. The timing of the policy raised eyebrows, suggesting a possible financial motive for Jack's murder. As the evidence mounted, Detective Lawson knew she needed a confession to solidify the case. She decided to apply pressure on Layla, hoping to exploit the cracks in her story. During a tense interrogation, Layla finally broke down. She admitted to visiting Jack's house the day before his death, but insisted that she had left before anything happened. She claimed that Derek had become increasingly unhinged, pressuring her to cut all ties with Jack. Detective Lawson also interviewed Derek's former associates again, this time focusing on his violent tendencies and potential motive. Mike, the former associate who had mentioned Derek's penchant for revenge, revealed that Derek had often spoken about wanting to eliminate anyone who threatened his relationship with Layla. Despite the mounting evidence against Derek, the investigation faced a critical juncture. Detective Lawson needed concrete proof to link Derek directly to the crime. She ordered a comprehensive search of Derek's apartment, hoping to uncover the final piece of the puzzle that would bring justice to Jack Thompson. As the investigation into Jack Thompson's murder continued, Detective Sarah Lawson delved deeper into Derek Stone's past. The more she uncovered, the more it became clear that Derek was a man with a history of violence and a potential for revenge. Derek's criminal record revealed a series of offenses dating back to his teenage years. He had been involved in gang activities, petty thefts, and assaults. His most serious conviction, however, was for armed robbery, which had landed him in prison for several years. During his incarceration, Derek had been involved in multiple altercations with other inmates, further highlighting his violent tendencies. Detective Lawson interviewed some of Derek's former associates, hoping to gain insight into his behavior and motives. Mike, the associate who had previously hinted at Derek's vengeful nature, provided a chilling account of Derek's time in prison. According to Mike, Derek had developed a reputation for being ruthless and unforgiving, often targeting those who crossed him or posed a threat. One former associate, Steve, recounted a particularly disturbing incident. Derek had been involved in a violent altercation with another inmate who had insulted him. The fight had left the inmate severely injured, and Derek had shown no remorse. Steve described Derek as a man who thrived on control and power, traits that had only intensified during his time behind bars. Detective Lawson also discovered that Derek had a history of unstable relationships. His ex-girlfriend, Lisa, came forward with her own harrowing account of their time together. Lisa described Derek as charming and attentive at first, but his demeanor quickly changed. He became possessive and abusive, isolating her from friends and family. She eventually managed to escape the relationship, but remained fearful of Derek's potential for violence. Lisa's account provided further insight into Derek's character. She mentioned that Derek had often spoken about his desire for revenge against anyone who wronged him. He harbored deep-seated grudges and was willing to go to great lengths to settle scores. Detective Lawson realized that Derek's relationship with Layla and his resentment towards Jack fit this pattern perfectly. Armed with this new information, Detective Lawson intensified her efforts to find concrete evidence linking Derek to Jack's murder. She ordered a comprehensive search of Derek's apartment, hoping to uncover any items that could connect him to the crime scene. The search yielded several pieces of potential evidence, including a set of keys that matched the locks on Jack's house and a blood-stained shirt hidden in the back of Derek's closet. Forensic analysis confirmed that the blood on the shirt matched Jack's, providing a direct link between Derek and the crime. This discovery was a significant breakthrough, but Detective Lawson knew that it was not enough on its own to secure a conviction. She needed a confession or additional evidence to solidify the case. Detective Lawson decided to confront Derek with the new evidence, hoping to elicit a reaction. During the interrogation, Derek's composure began to crack. He vehemently denied any involvement, but his increasingly erratic behavior suggested otherwise. Layla, who had been brought in for questioning once again, appeared visibly shaken when confronted with the evidence against Derek. In a desperate bid to save herself, Layla began to distance herself from Derek. She claimed that he had manipulated her and that she had been too afraid to leave him. Layla's statements, while self-serving, provided further insight into the toxic and volatile nature of their relationship. Detective Lawson knew she was close to unraveling the truth, but she needed one final push to bring the case to its conclusion. As the investigation reached its critical juncture, new evidence and unexpected revelations added further complexity to the case. Detective Sarah Lawson and her team were determined to untangle the web of deceit that surrounded Jack Thompson's murder. One of the most significant breakthroughs came from an unexpected source. A former inmate who had shared a cell with Derek, named Tony, came forward with crucial information. Tony revealed that Derek had confided in him about his plan to get rid of Jack. According to Tony, Derek had expressed his frustration with Jack's continued presence in Layla's life and had boasted about his intention to eliminate the problem once and for all. Tony's account added weight to the theory that Derek had premeditated the murder. He provided specific details that matched the evidence found at the crime scene, including the use of the baseball bat as the murder weapon. Tony's testimony was a game-changer, providing the corroboration Detective Lawson needed to build a solid case against Derek. However, the investigation took an unexpected turn when Layla's secret was uncovered. Detective Lawson's team discovered a series of hidden bank accounts in Layla's name, containing large sums of money that she had been siphoning off over the past few years. This revelation raised questions about Layla's true motives and her potential involvement in the murder. Layla's financial records revealed that she had been planning to leave Derek and start a new life. She had been saving money in secret, waiting for the right moment to make her escape. This newfound information painted a different picture of Layla, suggesting that she might have had her own reasons for wanting Jack out of the way. Detective Lawson confronted Layla with the evidence of the hidden bank accounts. Layla broke down, admitting that she had been trapped in a toxic and abusive relationship with Derek. She confessed that she had feared for her life and had been planning to escape, but insisted that she had no involvement in Jack's murder. Layla claimed that Derek had acted alone, driven by his own jealous rage. As the investigation unfolded, another twist emerged. A third party, previously unknown to the investigators, was discovered to have had contact with both Layla and Derek. This individual, named Ryan, was a former colleague of Derek's from his criminal days. Ryan had recently been released from prison and had reconnected with Derek. Detective Lawson brought Ryan in for questioning, hoping to uncover his role in the case. Ryan admitted to meeting with Derek and Layla on several occasions, but denied any involvement in the murder. However, his statements were inconsistent, and his nervous demeanor suggested that he was hiding something. The investigation took a dramatic turn when Ryan's fingerprints were found on the baseball bat used to kill Jack. Under intense interrogation, Ryan finally cracked. He confessed that Derek had enlisted his help in carrying out the murder, promising him a share of the life insurance money that Layla had taken out on Jack. Ryan revealed that Derek had planned every detail, from the initial confrontation to the disposal of evidence. Ryan's confession provided the missing piece of the puzzle, implicating both Derek and himself in the murder. Layla's role remained murky, but the evidence suggested that she had been a pawn in Derek's twisted game. Detective Lawson knew that the case was far from straightforward, but she was determined to bring those responsible to justice. With Ryan's confession in hand, Detective Sarah Lawson prepared for the final confrontation. She knew that Derek Stone would not go down without a fight, and she braced herself for a tense and potentially dangerous encounter. Detective Lawson and her team planned a coordinated effort to arrest Derek. They decided to approach him at his apartment, where he had been staying with Layla. The element of surprise was crucial, as they anticipated that Derek might attempt to flee or react violently. On the day of the operation, the team moved swiftly and efficiently. Detective Lawson knocked on Derek's door, her heart pounding with anticipation. Derek answered, his expression a mix of surprise and defiance. Detective Lawson presented the evidence and Ryan's confession, informing Derek that he was under arrest for the murder of Jack Thompson. Derek's reaction was immediate and explosive. He lunged at Detective Lawson, shouting accusations and threats. The officers quickly subdued him, but not before Derek managed to land a few blows. His resistance only served to reinforce the image of a violent and unstable individual, further sealing his fate. As Derek was taken into custody, Layla was brought in for questioning once again. The revelation of Ryan's involvement had shaken her, and she seemed genuinely terrified of Derek. Layla insisted that she had been unaware of the full extent of Derek's plan, and that she had never intended for Jack to be harmed. Despite Layla's claims, the evidence suggested that she had at least some knowledge of Derek's intentions. Detective Lawson pressed her for details, hoping to unravel the final threads of the case. Under intense questioning, Layla admitted that she had suspected Derek was planning something, but had been too afraid to confront him. The climax of the investigation came when Derek, now facing the reality of his situation, decided to cut a deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he agreed to provide a full confession and implicate Layla in the planning of the murder. Derek's confession was chilling, detailing the calculated and cold-blooded manner in which he had orchestrated Jack's death. Derek revealed that he had manipulated Layla into taking out the life insurance policy on Jack, promising her a future free from financial worries. He had then enlisted Ryan's help, using his former associate's desperation and loyalty to carry out the crime. Derek admitted that he had been driven by jealousy and a desire for control, unable to tolerate Jack's continued presence in Layla's life. Layla, confronted with Derek's confession, broke down completely. She admitted to her role in the plan, though she maintained that she had never intended for Jack to be killed. Her fear of Derek and her desire for freedom had clouded her judgment, leading her down a dark and tragic path. With both Derek and Layla in custody, the case against them was solid. The legal proceedings moved swiftly, with Derek receiving a life sentence for his role as the mastermind behind the murder. Layla, though complicit, received a lesser sentence due to her cooperation and the evidence of her abusive relationship with Derek. The town of Greenfield, though forever changed by the events, found a renewed sense of unity and resilience. The legacy of Jack Thompson lived on, a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of seeking justice for those who could no longer speak for themselves. In the quiet suburb of Millbrook, nestled just outside the bustling city of Hartford, Connecticut, a heinous crime shattered the illusion of peaceful suburban life. On a crisp autumn morning in September 2018, the body of 17-year-old Sarah Thompson was discovered in the woods behind her family's home. The gruesome scene sent shockwaves through the community, leaving residents locked behind their doors and whispering about the killer who walked among them. Detective Michael Carter, a seasoned investigator with the Hartford Police Department, was called to lead the case. With his sharp intuition and unwavering dedication, Carter delved into the intricate web of lies and deceit surrounding Sarah's murder. Little did he know that this case would challenge his perceptions and force him to confront the darkest aspects of human nature. As the investigation unfolded, suspicion initially fell on Sarah's stepmother, Amanda Wilson. The troubled relationship between the two had been no secret to their neighbors, and Amanda's apparent jealousy of her stepdaughter seemed to provide a motive. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly straightforward case lay a twisted tale of betrayal, secrets, and fatal consequences. At the center of this tragedy stood Robert Wilson, Sarah's stepfather. A respected businessman and pillar of the community, Robert appeared to be the grieving father figure, supporting his wife through their shared loss. But as Detective Carter would soon discover, Robert's carefully constructed facade concealed a web of lies that would ultimately lead to his downfall. This is the story of a murder that tore apart a family, challenged a detective's instincts, and revealed the devastating consequences of unchecked desire and betrayal. It serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous predators are hiding in plain sight, wearing the mask of normalcy in our very own neighborhoods. Sarah Thompson was a vibrant and promising young woman whose life was cut tragically short just weeks before her 18th birthday. Born to single mother Amanda Thompson in 2001, Sarah grew up as a bright and curious child, always eager to learn and explore the world around her. From an early age, Sarah showed a passion for art and literature. Her teachers often praised her creativity and insightful essays, marking her as a student with great potential. Sarah's artwork adorned the walls of her high school, and she had recently begun to explore photography, capturing the beauty of nature in the woods behind her home, the same woods that would ultimately become the site of her untimely death. Despite her academic and artistic achievements, Sarah's home life was far from perfect. When she was 12, her mother married Robert Wilson, a successful local businessman. While Sarah initially welcomed the stability Robert brought to their lives, the relationship between stepdaughter and stepfather grew increasingly strained as Sarah entered her teenage years. Friends and classmates described Sarah as kind-hearted, but fiercely independent. She had a small, tight-knit group of friends and was known for standing up against bullying in school. Her best friend, Emily Chen, recalled Sarah's dream of studying journalism at NYU, aspiring to become an investigative reporter and uncover truths hidden beneath the surface. Sarah's relationship with her mother, Amanda, had always been complex. As an only child, Sarah had been the center of Amanda's world for years. However, the arrival of Robert in their lives created a shift in dynamics. Sarah often felt that her mother prioritized her new marriage over their mother-daughter bond, leading to frequent arguments and emotional distance. In the months leading up to her death, those close to Sarah noticed a change in her demeanor. She became more withdrawn, spending increased time alone in her room or wandering in the woods with her camera. Her art took on darker themes, and her usually meticulous schoolwork began to slip. Emily remembered Sarah seeming distracted and worried, but when pressed, Sarah would brush off concerns with a forced smile and a change of subject. What no one knew at the time was that Sarah had stumbled upon a secret that would prove fatal. In her quest for truth and her natural curiosity, she had uncovered something that someone was willing to kill to keep hidden. Sarah Thompson's young life, full of promise and potential, was snuffed out just as she stood on the threshold of adulthood, leaving behind a community in mourning and a mystery that would shake Millbrook to its core. Robert Wilson, age 45 at the time of Sarah's murder, presented himself as the epitome of suburban success. A charismatic and well-respected financial advisor, Robert had built a thriving practice in Hartford, managing the wealth of some of the city's most affluent residents. His polished appearance and confident demeanor made him a natural leader in the community, serving on the local Chamber of Commerce and coaching youth soccer. Born and raised in a working-class family in Boston, Robert had clawed his way up the social ladder through a combination of charm, intelligence, and ruthless ambition. He met Amanda Thompson at a charity gala in 2012, and their whirlwind romance culminated in marriage just 8 months later. To the outside world, Robert appeared to be the perfect husband and stepfather, providing stability and financial security to Amanda and Sarah. However, beneath the veneer of success and respectability, Robert harbored dark secrets and unfulfilled desires. His marriage to Amanda had quickly lost its luster, and he found himself drawn to the excitement of an illicit affair. For the past year, Robert had been involved in a passionate relationship with Elena Gonzalez, the wife of his next-door neighbor and close friend David. Robert's affair with Elena was more than just a physical attraction. He felt truly alive in her presence, experiencing a connection he believed he had never shared with Amanda. The two lovers would meet in secret, stealing moments of passion while their spouses were at work or running errands. Robert became expert at lying and manipulating those around him to maintain his double life. As Sarah entered her late teens, Robert found himself increasingly uncomfortable in her presence. Her perceptive nature and keen eye for detail made him paranoid that she might uncover his infidelity. He began to avoid spending time alone with his stepdaughter, making excuses to miss family dinners and events. Friends and colleagues described Robert as charming and generous, always ready with a joke or a helping hand. David Gonzalez, unaware of Robert's betrayal, often praised him as the best neighbor and friend a man could ask for. Robert's clients trusted him implicitly, drawn in by his confident assurances and impressive track record. Yet those who knew Robert best sensed an underlying current of discontent. His assistant at the financial firm noted his increased irritability and distraction in the months leading up to Sarah's death. Robert's longtime friend from college, Mark Stevens, observed that Robert seemed to be living on edge, as if constantly looking over his shoulder. Little did anyone suspect that behind Robert Wilson's carefully crafted image lay a man capable of unspeakable acts, driven by desperation to protect his secrets and preserve his way of life at any cost. The grisly discovery was made on the morning of September 15, 2018, by a jogger on his usual trail through the woods behind the Wilson residence. The body of Sarah Thompson lay partially concealed beneath a pile of leaves and branches, a crude attempt at concealment that did little to hide the horrific nature of the crime. Detective Michael Carter arrived on the scene within the hour, his experienced eye taking in every detail. Sarah's body showed signs of a violent struggle. Bruises marred her arms and face, and defensive wounds on her hands indicated she had fought desperately for her life. The cause of death was immediately apparent, a jagged wound across her throat, likely inflicted with a serrated blade. As the forensics team combed the area for evidence, Carter noted several key details. Sarah's camera, which friends claimed she always carried on her woodland excursions, was missing. Drag marks and disturbed vegetation suggested the body had been moved from the initial site of the attack, possibly in an attempt to hide it from immediate discovery. Perhaps most tellingly, there were no signs of sexual assault, leading Carter to suspect that the motive for the murder was personal rather than opportunistic. The brutality of the attack pointed to a crime of passion. Someone who knew Sarah and had been driven to a moment of uncontrollable rage. As news of the murder spread, the once peaceful community of Millbrook descended into a state of fear and suspicion. Neighbors who had previously left their doors unlocked now double-checked their security systems. Parents kept their children indoors, and the woods that had once been a place of recreation became a no-go zone, cordoned off with yellow police tape. Detective Michael Carter, a 20-year veteran of the Hartford Police Department, took charge of the investigation with a grim determination. Known for his meticulous approach and uncanny ability to see connections others missed, Carter had solved some of the department's most challenging cases. As he stood in the Wilsons' living room, surveying the family photos on the mantel, he knew this case would test him like never before. The first 48 hours of the investigation were a whirlwind of activity. Carter and his team conducted initial interviews with family members, friends, and neighbors. Sarah's school records were examined, her social media account scrutinized, and her movements in the days leading up to her death were painstakingly reconstructed. Robert Wilson, appearing shell-shocked, provided a detailed account of his whereabouts on the night of the murder. He claimed to have been working late at his office, a fact corroborated by security footage and his assistant's testimony. Amanda Wilson, still visibly distraught, struggled to maintain composure during her interview. She admitted to having argued with Sarah the afternoon before her disappearance, but insisted it was just typical mother-daughter friction. As Carter delved deeper, a picture began to emerge of a household fraught with tension. Neighbors spoke of frequent arguments between Sarah and her mother, their raised voices often carrying across manicured lawns. Sarah's best friend, Emily Chen, revealed that Sarah had been increasingly unhappy at home, feeling trapped and misunderstood. The forensics team's initial findings provided more questions than answers. Trace evidence found on Sarah's clothing didn't match samples taken from Robert or Amanda. The murder weapon, likely a hunting knife or similar serrated blade, was nowhere to be found despite an extensive search of the Wilson property and surrounding areas. A breakthrough came when Carter interviewed Elena Gonzalez, the Wilsons' next-door neighbor. Elena, visibly nervous during the interview, mentioned that she had seen Sarah arguing with Amanda in the driveway the day before her disappearance. More intriguingly, Elena let slip that Amanda had always seemed jealous of her daughter's youth and beauty. This information, combined with the tumultuous home environment and Amanda's shaky alibi for the night of the murder led Carter to focus his attention on Sarah's mother. He theorized that years of resentment had finally boiled over, resulting in a confrontation that turned deadly. As the investigation entered its second week, Carter felt confident they were on the right track. He obtained a warrant to search Amanda's personal belongings and communications, hoping to find the crucial piece of evidence that would break the case wide open. However, a nagging doubt lingered in the back of Carter's mind. Something about Robert Wilson's calm demeanor and perfect alibi struck him as too neat, too convenient. Little did Carter know that his instincts were leading him toward a truth far more sinister than he could have imagined. As the investigation progressed, all signs seemed to point toward Amanda Wilson as the prime suspect of her daughter's murder. Detective Carter, driven by the evidence at hand, began to build a case against the 42-year-old homemaker with a troubled past. Carter's team uncovered a series of heated text exchanges between Amanda and Sarah in the weeks leading up to the murder. In one particularly vicious argument, Amanda accused Sarah of trying to sabotage her marriage, while Sarah fired back, calling her mother a pathetic, jealous old woman. These digital breadcrumbs seemed to support the theory of a family dynamic that had reached a breaking point. Further fueling suspicion was Amanda's behavior in the aftermath of Sarah's death. While initially distraught, she quickly became defensive and evasive during questioning. Her alibi for the night of the murder was weak. She claimed to have been home alone, watching television with no one to corroborate her story. A search of the Wilson home uncovered a journal hidden in Amanda's bedside table. Entries detailed her growing resentment towards Sarah, lamenting the girl's beauty and the attention she received from Robert. One disturbing passage read, "Sometimes I wish she would just disappear. Our lives would be so much better without her constant presence, her judging eyes." The case against Amanda seemed to strengthen when a neighbor reported seeing her return home in the early hours of the morning on the day Sarah's body was discovered. Amanda had no explanation for this late-night excursion, claiming she must have been sleepwalking, a condition she had never mentioned before. As circumstantial evidence mounted, Carter felt increasing pressure from his superiors and the media to make an arrest. The community, gripped by fear, demanded justice for Sarah. Amanda Wilson, once a sympathetic figure, became the target of public hatred and suspicion. Carter, despite his growing certainty of Amanda's guilt, couldn't shake a lingering doubt. Something about her desperation and fear during interrogations didn't align with the calculated killer he believed had committed this crime. Nevertheless, with the evidence at hand, he prepared to make an arrest. On a rainy Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Sarah's body was found, Amanda Wilson was taken into custody. As she was led from her home in handcuffs, she protested her innocence, her cries echoing through the stunned neighborhood. Robert Wilson watched from the doorway, his face an unreadable mask as his wife was placed in the back of a police cruiser. Little did Carter know that in his pursuit of justice, he had fallen for a brilliantly orchestrated misdirection, leaving the true killer free to cover his tracks. The case against Amanda Wilson seemed airtight, but Detective Michael Carter couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. It was a small detail, easily overlooked, that finally set him on the path to the truth. While reviewing security footage from businesses near the Wilson home, Carter noticed Robert's car leaving his office parking lot much earlier than he had claimed on the night of the murder. Intrigued by this discrepancy, Carter decided to dig deeper into Robert Wilson's life. He re-interviewed Robert's colleagues and clients, paying closer attention to the man's movements and relationships. It was during a conversation with Robert's assistant that Carter stumbled upon a crucial piece of information. Robert had been making frequent, unexplained trips to a coffee shop across town, always during his lunch break. Surveillance of the coffee shop revealed a startling discovery. Robert was meeting regularly with Elena Gonzalez, his neighbor's wife. The two displayed an intimacy that went far beyond friendly neighborly interactions. Carter had uncovered Robert's secret affair. With this new information, Carter approached Elena for another interview. Confronted with evidence of the affair, Elena broke down, revealing the extent of her relationship with Robert. They had been involved for over a year, stealing moments together whenever they could. Elena, racked with guilt, admitted that she had lied in her previous statement to protect Robert. The affair cast Robert's alibi for the night of the murder in a new light. Elena confirmed that they had indeed met that evening, contradicting Robert's claim of working late.
This revelation shattered the carefully constructed timeline Robert had provided. As Carter delved further into the relationship between Robert and Elena, he uncovered a web of lies and secret rendezvous. Bank records showed Robert had recently inquired about transferring large sums of money offshore. Email exchanges hinted at plans for a new life together, away from their spouses and responsibilities. The detective now faced a troubling question. Could Robert Wilson, the grieving stepfather, actually be Sarah's killer? The motive was unclear, but the cracks in Robert's perfect facade were beginning to show. Carter realized he had been so focused on Amanda that he had nearly missed the real story unfolding right before his eyes. The pivotal moment in the investigation came from an unexpected source. Sarah's best friend, Emily Chen, approached Detective Carter with a small leather-bound book, Sarah's personal diary. Emily, racked with guilt, admitted she had initially withheld the diary, fearing it might tarnish Sarah's memory. But as suspicion fell on Amanda, Emily realized the truth was more important than protecting her friend's secrets. Carter spent a sleepless night poring over Sarah's private thoughts. The diary painted a vivid picture of a young woman grappling with a terrible discovery. In entries dating back several months, Sarah wrote of her growing suspicion that her stepfather was having an affair. She described catching glimpses of furtive text messages, overhearing hushed phone calls, and noticing Robert's increasingly erratic behavior. The most damning entry came just 3 days before Sarah's murder. In shaky handwriting, she recounted following Robert one evening and witnessing him in an intimate embrace with Elena Gonzalez. Sarah wrote of her disgust and betrayal, expressing uncertainty about whether to confront Robert or tell her mother. This revelation provided the missing piece of the puzzle. Sarah had discovered Robert's affair, presenting a clear motive for murder. Robert, a man who had built his life on carefully maintaining appearances, faced the threat of losing everything: his marriage, his reputation, and his financial stability. Armed with this new information, Carter revisited the forensic evidence. He ordered a more thorough examination of Sarah's clothing, specifically searching for trace evidence that might have been overlooked. The results were telling. Fibers found on Sarah's jacket matched those from a rare wool blend used in Robert's expensive suits. Furthermore, a re-examination of Sarah's phone records showed a series of calls to Robert's office number on the day of her disappearance. The calls had been brief, suggesting Sarah might have been trying to confront her stepfather or arrange a meeting. Carter also discovered that Robert had purchased a hunting knife from a local sporting goods store just a week before the murder. The knife, conspicuously missing from the Wilson home, matched the type of weapon believed to have been used in the crime. As the pieces fell into place, Carter realized the extent of Robert's deception. He had not only manipulated his family and community, but had also skillfully misdirected the entire investigation towards Amanda. The detective felt a mix of admiration for Robert's cunning and disgust at his cold-blooded actions. With mounting evidence pointing to Robert Wilson as the killer, Carter knew he needed to move quickly. The man who had once been viewed as a pillar of the community was now revealed to be a calculating murderer, willing to sacrifice his stepdaughter to protect his secrets. Detective Carter decided to confront Robert Wilson at his office, away from the prying eyes of neighbors and the media that had been camped outside the Wilson home. As Carter and his partner entered the plush confines of Robert's financial advisory firm, they found him in the middle of a client meeting, the picture of professional composure. In a voice barely above a whisper, Robert began to talk. He spoke of Sarah confronting him in the woods, threatening to expose his affair to Amanda and Elena's husband. He described the panic that overtook him, the fear of losing everything he had worked for. With tears streaming down his face, Robert recounted how he had lashed out in desperation, silencing Sarah permanently. The confession poured out of him, a torrent of guilt and self-loathing. Robert described how he had meticulously planned to frame Amanda, playing on the known tensions between stepmother and stepdaughter. As Carter placed him under arrest, Robert's only words were a broken plea. "Don't tell Elena. Please don't let her know what I've done." The once proud man was led out of his office in handcuffs, his world collapsing around him as the truth of his actions finally came to light. After a 2-week trial and mere hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a guilty verdict on all counts, including first-degree murder. The judge, citing the brutal nature of the crime and Robert's calculated attempts to deceive investigators, sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Justice had been served. But for those whose lives had been shattered by Robert's actions, the wounds would take far longer to heal. In the end, the case of Robert Wilson stands as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable loss, the relentless pursuit of justice, and the enduring power of a young woman's voice, even when silenced, to ultimately reveal the truth. Sebastian Thompson, a successful businessman, and Hazel, his homemaker wife, had been married for 15 years. Their marriage, once vibrant, had been faltering, prompting them to seek professional help. They enrolled in a retreat led by the renowned Dr. David Green, a charismatic therapist with a reputation for mending fractured relationships. On the fourth night of the retreat, Sebastian was found dead in their cabin. His death, initially appearing as a tragic accident, soon revealed darker undertones. The investigation uncovered a tangled web of deceit, betrayal, and manipulation. The affair between Hazel and Dr. Green, hidden from everyone but the two, was a catalyst for the events that unfolded. Dr. Green, once a beacon of hope for struggling couples, was now at the center of a murder investigation. His charming exterior masked a manipulative mind with financial motives. As the truth unraveled, it became clear that Sebastian's death was no accident, but a coldly orchestrated murder. This true crime story delves into the complex relationships, personal histories, and the sinister plot that led to Sebastian Thompson's untimely death. It examines the psychological manipulation employed by Dr. Green, the emotional turmoil of Hazel, and the meticulous investigation that brought the truth to light. This is the chilling account of a couple's therapy retreat that turned deadly, revealing the dark side of love and trust. The couple's therapy retreat was situated in a secluded, luxurious cabin in the mountains, surrounded by dense forests and picturesque views. The location was chosen to provide an escape from the daily stresses of life, offering a peaceful environment conducive to healing and introspection. As Sebastian and Hazel Thompson arrived at the retreat, they were greeted by Dr. David Green. With his warm smile and reassuring presence, he exuded confidence and empathy, instantly putting the participants at ease. Alongside Sebastian and Hazel, there were three other couples, each grappling with their own issues. The retreat kicked off with a group session, where each couple introduced themselves and shared their reasons for attending. Sebastian, tall and well-built, spoke with a hint of frustration in his voice. He expressed his desire to rekindle the love and trust that had diminished over the years. Hazel, petite and attractive, echoed his sentiments, though her eyes betrayed a deeper, unspoken sadness. Dr. Green facilitated the sessions with skill and sensitivity, creating an atmosphere of openness and vulnerability. He emphasized the importance of honest communication and trust, urging couples to confront their issues head-on. The initial sessions were intense, with emotions running high as old wounds were reopened. Sebastian and Hazel's interactions were Sebastianed by underlying tension. Sebastian's controlling nature clashed with Hazel's growing sense of independence. Their exchanges were fraught with resentment and unspoken accusations. Dr. Green seemed particularly attentive to their case, often singling them out for deeper analysis. In private sessions, the dynamics were different. Dr. Green focused on building rapport, carefully listening to their individual grievances. He offered Hazel a sympathetic ear, understanding her feelings of entrapment and frustration. For Sebastian, he played the role of a stern yet caring advisor, urging him to let go of his controlling tendencies. The other couples at the retreat observed the palpable tension between Sebastian and Hazel. They noticed how Dr. Green seemed to give Hazel more attention, often engaging her in deeper conversations. This did not go unnoticed by Sebastian, who began to feel a growing sense of unease. The retreat's idyllic setting provided a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil brewing beneath the surface. The towering pines and serene lake seemed to mock the chaos within the hearts of the participants. As the days progressed, the initial hope for reconciliation gave way to a sense of impending doom. Sebastian and Hazel's relationship, instead of healing, seemed to be unraveling further. Dr. Green's presence, once a source of comfort, became a point of contention. The other couples, too, began to sense that something was amiss, though they couldn't quite put their finger on it. As the retreat moved into its third day, the tension reached a boiling point. The stage was set for a tragic turn of events that would shatter the tranquil facade of the retreat and expose the dark secrets lurking beneath. Sebastian Thompson's life was a testament to hard work and ambition. Born into a middle-class family, he had climbed the corporate ladder through sheer determination and relentless effort. By the age of 45, he had secured a high-ranking position at a prestigious firm, earning a handsome salary and enjoying the perks of success. However, his professional achievements came at a cost. The long hours and constant pressure strained his personal life, creating a rift between him and Hazel. Sebastian's control issues stemmed from his desire for perfection. He demanded the best from himself and those around him, often leading to conflicts at home. His need to control every aspect of his life extended to his marriage, where he expected Hazel to conform to his ideals. This created a suffocating environment for Hazel, who felt increasingly trapped in a role she hadn't chosen. Hazel Thompson, in contrast, had led a more sheltered life. Growing up in a small town, she had married Sebastian young and dedicated herself to being a supportive wife and homemaker. Initially, she found fulfillment in this role, but as the years passed, she began to feel a deep sense of dissatisfaction. The love and attention she once received from Sebastian had dwindled, replaced by criticism and control. Hazel's discontent grew as she watched her husband thrive in his career, while her own aspirations were stifled. She longed for freedom, for a chance to explore her own identity outside the confines of her marriage. It was during this time of vulnerability that she met Dr. David Green. Dr. Green's background was shrouded in mystery. He was a charismatic figure, known for his ability to connect with people on a deep emotional level. His reputation as a skilled therapist had earned him a loyal following, and his retreats were highly sought after. However, beneath his polished exterior lay a manipulative mind. Dr. Green had a history of exploiting vulnerable individuals for personal gain. His charm and intelligence masked a dark side that few were aware of. He had a knack for identifying those who were emotionally fragile and used their insecurities to his advantage. Financial gain was a significant motivator for him, but so was the thrill of control. Hazel's vulnerability and dissatisfaction made her an easy target for Dr. Green. He began their affair with calculated precision, offering her the attention and validation she craved. Their interactions started innocently enough, with late-night conversations and sympathetic listening. Gradually, he intensified his influence, making Hazel dependent on his approval and guidance. Dr. Green's manipulation extended beyond the affair. He subtly planted seeds of doubt and resentment in Hazel's mind, exacerbating the existing tension in her marriage. He portrayed himself as the only one who truly understood her, driving a wedge between her and Sebastian. His ultimate goal was to remove Sebastian from the equation, both to deepen his control over Hazel and to gain financially. Sebastian, unaware of the affair, sensed a shift in Hazel's behavior. She became more distant and withdrawn, often disappearing for hours without explanation. His attempts to confront her were met with defensiveness and anger, further straining their relationship. He turned to Dr. Green for guidance, unaware that the man he trusted was orchestrating his downfall. Dr. Green's plan was meticulous. He exploited the trust placed in him by both Sebastian and Hazel, using their therapy sessions to manipulate their emotions. He created scenarios that heightened the conflict between them, pushing them to the brink. His aim was to drive Sebastian to a point of desperation where he could be easily eliminated. As the retreat progressed, Dr. Green's influence over Hazel grew stronger. She became increasingly reliant on him, viewing him as her savior from a life of misery. Her perception of Sebastian shifted from a loving husband to an oppressive figure, a change fueled by Dr. Green's constant manipulation. The stage was set for a tragic culmination. Sebastian's frustration and Hazel's growing dependence on Dr. Green created a volatile mix, primed for a deadly outcome. Dr. Green, ever the puppet master, watched as his plan unfolded, confident in his ability to control the narrative. The affair between Hazel and Dr. Green began subtly, almost innocently. During the early sessions, Dr. Green took a special interest in Hazel, recognizing her vulnerability. He offered her a sympathetic ear and gentle words of encouragement, which she desperately needed. Their relationship escalated during private therapy sessions. Dr. Green's office, a cozy room with soft lighting and plush furniture, became a sanctuary for Hazel. She poured out her heart, sharing her frustrations and dreams. Dr. Green listened attentively, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers, making her feel seen and understood. Late-night conversations turned into secret rendezvous. They would meet in secluded spots around the retreat, hidden from the prying eyes of other participants. Their meetings were filled with whispered confessions and stolen kisses, each encounter deepening their bond. Hazel's internal conflict was intense. She felt a growing attachment to Dr. Green, yet guilt gnawed at her conscience. She loved Sebastian, or at least she thought she did. But the connection she felt with Dr. Green was unlike anything she had experienced. He made her feel alive, appreciated, and desired. Dr. Green, on the other hand, was playing a calculated game. He knew how to manipulate Hazel's emotions, feeding her insecurities and deepening her dependence on him. His motives were far from pure. Financial gain and control drove his actions. He saw Hazel not just as a lover, but as a pawn in his grander scheme. Their affair was a dangerous dance fraught with risk. Hazel's behavior became increasingly erratic, her guilt manifesting as anxiety and paranoia. She feared discovery, not just for the affair but for the growing realization that Dr. Green had a hold over her that she couldn't break. One evening, as they met in a secluded part of the retreat, Dr. Green's true nature began to surface. He spoke of their future together, painting a picture of a life free from Sebastian's control. Hazel, caught in his web, began to believe in the possibility of a new life. However, the cost of this new life was steep, and the shadows of doubt began to creep into her mind. Dr. Green's manipulation extended to Sebastian as well. He planted seeds of suspicion, subtly suggesting that Hazel's behavior was a reaction to Sebastian's controlling nature. He urged Sebastian to be more understanding and patient, all the while knowing that his advice would only exacerbate the tension. As the retreat progressed, the affair became more intense, the secrecy heightening the thrill and the danger. One evening, during a particularly heated session, the tension boiled over. Sebastian, feeling cornered and misunderstood, lashed out verbally. He accused Hazel of not trying, of already giving up on their marriage. Hazel, instead of responding, looked to Dr. Green for support. This small gesture was the breaking point for Sebastian. His face contorted with a mixture of hurt and rage, and he stormed out of the session. Dr. Green seized the opportunity to further manipulate Hazel. He comforted her, emphasizing how Sebastian's behavior was proof of his controlling nature. Hazel, emotionally fragile and desperate for validation, absorbed Dr. Green's words, her trust in him growing stronger. The other couples were taken aback by Sebastian's outburst. They had their own issues, but none had witnessed such a dramatic confrontation. Dr. Green addressed the group, explaining that sometimes conflicts needed to be brought to the surface to be resolved. His explanation was met with nods of understanding, though doubts lingered. Sebastian, alone and seething, wandered the retreat grounds. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing Hazel, not just to the problems in their marriage, but to Dr. Green himself. His mind raced with suspicions and fears, each thought more troubling than the last. He needed to find a way to reach Hazel, to break through the barriers that seemed to be growing between them. That night in their cabin, the atmosphere was tense and heavy with unspoken words. Sebastian tried to reach out to Hazel, to apologize and explain, but she was distant, her thoughts seemingly elsewhere. The silence between them was deafening, a stark contrast to the arguments that had filled the past days. Dr. Green, watching from the shadows, felt a sense of triumph. His plan was unfolding perfectly. The tension between Sebastian and Hazel was at its peak, and the stage was set for the next phase of his scheme. He knew that Sebastian was close to breaking, and all he needed was one final push. As the retreat moved into its fourth day, the sense of impending doom grew stronger. The other couples, though unaware of the full extent of the turmoil, sensed that something was terribly wrong. Dr. Green maintained his facade of professionalism, but his eyes betrayed a glint of anticipation. The stage was set for a tragic climax, one that would shatter the lives of those involved and expose the dark undercurrents that had been simmering beneath the surface. The tension, carefully cultivated by Dr. Green, was about to reach a deadly crescendo. The fourth night of the retreat was shrouded in an eerie stillness. The usual sounds of the forest seemed muted, and a heavy fog rolled in, enveloping the cabin in a ghostly embrace. Sebastian and Hazel had retired to their room after another tense day, the silence between them more oppressive than ever. Around midnight, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night. The other couples, jolted from their sleep, rushed out of their rooms, confusion and fear etched on their faces. The source of the scream was unmistakable. It came from Sebastian and Hazel's cabin.
Dr. Green, appearing composed yet concerned, quickly took charge. He directed the others to stay back while he entered the cabin. Inside, he found Hazel, pale and trembling, standing over Sebastian's lifeless body. The room was in disarray, signs of a struggle evident. Sebastian lay on the floor, his eyes wide open in a final expression of shock and pain. There were visible bruises on his neck, and a broken lamp lay nearby, its jagged edges stained with blood. Hazel, in a state of shock, kept muttering that she didn't know what happened, that she had woken up to find him like this. Dr. Green, masking his satisfaction, wrapped his arm around Hazel, guiding her away from the scene. He assured the other participants that he would handle the situation and contacted the local authorities. Within minutes, the tranquility of the retreat was shattered by the arrival of police and paramedics. The initial investigation pointed to foul play. The signs of struggle and the nature of Sebastian's injuries indicated a violent confrontation. Hazel, as the only other person in the room, became the prime suspect. She was taken into custody for questioning, her dazed state complicating the initial interrogation. Dr. Green, playing the role of the concerned therapist, vouched for Hazel. He explained to the police that she had been under immense stress and that Sebastian had been aggressive. He painted a picture of a woman pushed to her limits, subtly suggesting that she might have acted in self-defense. The police, while not entirely convinced, took Dr. Green's statements into account. They began piecing together the events leading up to the murder. Other participants were interviewed, and it became clear that the Thompsons' relationship had been in turmoil. The tension between them, coupled with Sebastian's controlling nature, provided a potential motive. However, as the investigation progressed, inconsistencies in Hazel's account began to emerge. She couldn't clearly remember the events of the night, her memories a foggy jumble of fear and confusion. Her emotional state was fragile, and she seemed genuinely distraught over Sebastian's death. Dr. Green continued to support Hazel, maintaining his role as her confidant and protector. He provided the police with additional details, carefully crafting a narrative that supported his version of events. He portrayed Sebastian as a domineering husband, and Hazel as a victim driven to desperation. As the police delved deeper, they uncovered the affair between Hazel and Dr. Green. This revelation added a new dimension to the case. The affair provided a potential motive for Hazel, but it also raised questions about Dr. Green's involvement. His influence over Hazel was evident, and some investigators began to suspect that he might have had a hand in the events. Dr. Green, sensing the growing suspicion, remained calm and cooperative. He deflected attention from himself, emphasizing his role as a therapist trying to help a troubled couple. His charm and professionalism worked in his favor, but the police weren't entirely convinced. The discovery of the affair shifted the focus of the investigation. Hazel, now seen as both a suspect and a victim, faced intense scrutiny. Dr. Green, while not officially a suspect, was under the radar. The stage was set for a complex and convoluted investigation, with multiple layers of deception and manipulation to unravel. As the night wore on, the sense of tragedy and confusion deepened. Sebastian's death, initially seen as a tragic accident, now appeared to be a murder driven by hidden motives and dark secrets. The serene retreat had become the scene of a chilling crime, and the truth was far from clear. The police investigation into Sebastian Thompson's death quickly intensified. Detective Sarah Collins, a seasoned investigator with a keen eye for detail, was assigned to the case. She arrived at the retreat the morning after the murder, determined to uncover the truth behind the tragic event. Detective Collins began by interviewing the other participants. Their accounts painted a picture of escalating tension between Sebastian and Hazel. Most of them mentioned Dr. Green's unusual interest in Hazel and his seemingly antagonistic stance towards Sebastian. The affair, already known to the police, became a focal point in her inquiry. In her interview with Hazel, Detective Collins noticed the woman's fragility and confusion. Hazel's account of the night was fragmented and inconsistent. She repeatedly claimed she couldn't remember what had happened, that she had woken up to find Sebastian dead. Her emotional distress seemed genuine, yet Collins couldn't ignore the possibility that Hazel was involved. Dr. Green was interviewed next. He maintained his composed demeanor, offering a polished account of his interactions with Sebastian and Hazel. He admitted to the affair, describing it as a regrettable but understandable consequence of Hazel's unhappy marriage. He framed himself as a supportive figure, trying to help Hazel through her emotional turmoil.
Despite his cooperative attitude, Detective Collins couldn't shake the feeling that Dr. Green was hiding something. His responses were too calculated, too perfect. She decided to delve deeper into his background, looking for any signs of past misconduct. Through retreats, other participants provided further insights. Several of them mentioned the escalating arguments between Sebastian and Hazel, and a few noted that Dr. Green seemed to exacerbate these conflicts rather than resolve them. One participant, a woman named Rachel, mentioned overhearing a particularly heated argument between Sebastian and Hazel the night before the murder. Detective Collins followed up on Rachel's lead, examining the retreat's layout and the possibility of others hearing the argument. The cabin's isolated location made it unlikely that anyone outside could have heard, suggesting that Rachel might have been closer than she admitted. Collins began to consider the possibility of other witnesses or accomplices. The forensic team provided crucial evidence. The bruises on Sebastian's neck indicated strangulation, and the broken lamp suggested a violent struggle. However, there were no defensive wounds on Hazel, raising questions about her involvement in the physical altercation. The presence of an unidentified fingerprint on the lamp added another layer of mystery. As the investigation progressed, Collins discovered financial irregularities linked to Dr. Green. Large sums of money had been transferred from Hazel's account to an offshore account in Dr. Green's name. This revelation pointed to a clear financial motive, suggesting that Dr. Green had been manipulating Hazel not just emotionally, but financially as well. Armed with Hazel's partial recollection and the financial evidence, Detective Collins confronted Dr. Green. His calm facade cracked as he faced the mounting evidence. The fingerprint on the broken lamp, initially unidentified, was found to belong to Dr. Green. This evidence, combined with Hazel's testimony and the financial trail, solidified the case against him. Dr. Green's manipulative tactics had backfired, leaving a trail of evidence that pointed directly to him. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Rachel Foster, meticulously laid out the evidence against Dr. Green. They highlighted his manipulative tactics, the financial exploitation of Hazel, and the clear motive behind Sebastian's murder. Witnesses, including Hazel and other retreat participants, testified about the escalating tension and Dr. Green's undue influence. The jury, after deliberating for several hours, found Dr. Green guilty of first-degree murder and financial exploitation and was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In the end, the truth had been uncovered, and justice had been served. The scars left behind were deep, but they were also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Hazel and the other survivors found a way to move forward, their experiences shaping a future where trust and healing could coexist.